Up until this moment, Xianxia finally understood how terrifying the power and authority of the overlord of Snow Ink region was. For example, E1 was an elder of a top power, the Day clan, and it possessed monstrous authority. However, it was instantly crushed by Empress Wuxia because of a single sentence, and she even asked the Day clan's patriarch to come apologize to her. This obviously showed how lofty and dignified Empress Wuxia was. It wasn't just Xianxia. Even all of those great figures and disciples were shocked, and they didn't dare speak another word because they were deeply afraid of offending Empress Wuxia. Just like this, Xianxia and Tai Yunping followed behind Empress Wuxia, and they left the hall amidst an expanse of complicated gazes. Elder E1. At this moment, the members of the Day clan finally dared to come forward, and they intended to lift up E1 who sat weakly on the ground. However, they were stopped before they could come close. From this moment onwards, if the patriarch of the Day clan doesn't come apologize to the Empress, then this fellow Taoist can only stay here. It was Yun Qing that stopped them. His aged face was completely emotionless, and he spoke indifferently before he flicked his sleeve and took E1 away. From the beginning until the end, there was actually no one that dared to stop him. All the disciples of the Day clan had unsightly expressions that changed indeterminately. Etienne was even stunned and was on the verge of crying, yet found himself to have no tears. He'd never ever imagined that the matter would develop to such an extent. Why? I've clearly exposed that fellow's identity, yet why has it come to no effect in the end? And it even caused Elder E1 to be taken into their custody? It's even to the extent that Empress Wuxia was offended, and it caused the patriarch to be implicated as well. Why exactly has all of this happened? E1 was unable to figure it out, and he was frustrated and helpless. When everyone else in the hall witnessed this scene, they couldn't help but feel slightly worried, because they'd already discerned that Empress Wuxia was obviously siding with Xianxia. Why exactly did Empress Wuxia not hesitate to offend the Day clan and insist on acting in this way? Who exactly is that Xianxia, and why is he worthy of Empress Wuxia acting in this way? All of them were unable to figure it out. But no matter what, they felt that Xianxia's origins had become even more mysterious. No one was able to discern whether he'd really come from the lower dimensions, or if he actually possessed the copper coin of Treasurefall and overarching Heaven Net. However, they'd confirmed that Xianxia's origins were extraordinary. He didn't just possess the potential of a spirit god Exalt. He'd even helped Tai Yunping attain the first in the Star Hunt meeting on his own. Moreover, he'd even defeated the son of Imperial Monarch Gochun, Sun Yangping. Such a figure was never simple. Waves of glistening light flowed on the clear lake. Divine birds fluttered about in the distant sky, and they emanated a string of clear and resounding cries that sounded like the sound of nature. There was a flat platform at the center of the lake, and it was enshrouded with divine mist. There were numerous bright golden divine lotuses planted in its vicinity, and they swayed amidst the wind and emanated strands of faint fragrance that refreshed the heart and mind. This was a secret realm, and it was the place Empress Wuxia cultivated in meditation. At this moment, Xianxia sat cross-legged before the table here. There was a cup of steaming hot divine tea on the table, and the fragrance from it assaulted his nose. The tea was obviously a rare divine treasure, and merely taking a whiff of it caused Xianxia's soul to feel a wave of comfort. Moreover, every single pore on his body opened up while his vital energy circulated in a lively manner. It was extremely profound. Empress Wuxia sat cross-legged before another table. At this moment, she'd removed the phoenix crown on her head, causing her dense jet-black hair to hang down loosely like a waterfall that flowed to her shoulder. It caused her bearing to carry a graceful and modest feeling and slightly reduced the proud and chilly aura she had. Only her red veil was still concealing her appearance, causing others to be unable to lay eyes upon her true appearance, and only a pair of eyes that were clear and deep like lakes remained for all to see. However, even then, she still possessed a unique and mysterious sense of beauty, and it stirred the heart. She seemed almost picturesque, and her beauty didn't seem like something that should exist in this world. Sometimes, she felt curious if he would be able to lay eyes upon her true appearance if he utilized the eye of divine truth. This thought caused his heart to palpitate with eagerness and excitement, yet he didn't dare act in this way. Otherwise, if it was noticed by Empress Wuxia, then it would absolutely no different than courting death. There is no lack of people that re-skilled in the talisman Tao within the ancient god domain, yet merely a few are capable of attaining a certain level of accomplishment in it. Suddenly, Empress Wuxia raised her clear eyes, and she gazed at Xianxia. Moreover, those that could utilize the talisman Tao in battle and erupt with such might like you had in a battle between someone at the same cultivation realm, such people can be counted with my fingers. Xianxia was stunned. He picked up the teacup on the table and took a sip, yet he didn't say anything. Coupled with what that little fellow from the Dai clan said, "I've roughly guessed your background." Empress Wuxia's clear eyes were suddenly suffused with a wisp of seemingly ethereal and strange glow. "Little fellow, do you admit it?" She put down the teacup in his hand and said, "Empress is truly discerning and wise. I'm indeed from the Oracle Mountain. I concealed it earlier because I wasn't willing to create unnecessary trouble. I hope Empress can forgive me." His answer was frank and completely unhesitant, and it caused Empress Wuxia to be stunned. She couldn't help but smile as she said, "I thought that you would refuse to admit it no matter what, just like what you did in the Water Cloud Palace earlier." She shrugged and smiled bitterly. "If I did act in that way, Empress would probably feel displeased, right?" Empress Wuxia nodded. "Yes, if you dared to act in that way, then I would dare to immediately hand you over to the Dai clan." Xi's face froze. A wisp of rare amusement appeared in Empress Wuxia's clear eyes, and it disappeared in an instant before she said, "Actually, I'd roughly guessed your origins a long time ago when the Star Hunt meeting was still being carried out, and it was even to the extent that some disciples of the Sovereign Sect had come looking for me because they intended to seek my assistance to capture someone." She was shocked in his heart while his eyes suddenly narrowed. The Sovereign Sect really is everywhere, and it's like a haunting spirit that just refuses to leave. However, I didn't agree. Empress Wuxia said indifferently, "It wasn't only because of you, and it was also for the sake of maintaining the order in the Star Hunt meeting. No matter who intends to break my rules, that person has to think twice about the consequences of infuriating me." She couldn't help but glance at Empress Wuxia with surprise. He was clearly aware in his heart that she'd imperceptibly helped him deal with this danger that came from the Sovereign Sect. Actually, she had long since been aware that from the moment the Sovereign Sect's Yen escaped, he was bound to face the threat that the Sovereign Sect posed sooner or later. So he didn't doubt Empress Wuxia at all, because with her status, there was utterly no need to deceive him. "No matter what, I have to thank Empress for your protection." She cupped his hands and spoke in a serious manner. Empress Wuxia waved her hand, and then she changed the topic and said, "Since you helped that little girl obtain the first position in the Star Hunt meeting this time, I have to give you a reward. Tell me, do you have any questions in respect of cultivating? You can mention them all, and if I'm able to answer you, then I definitely won't disappoint you." She pondered briefly, and then he said, "I haven't encountered any barriers in my cultivation for now, although I do have something that has been troubling me, and I want to rely on Empress to obtain the answer." "Speak," said Empress Wuxia. "I want to know exactly where Oracle Mountain and Nuwas Dao Palace resides." She took a deep breath before he slowly asked this question, and his gaze carried a wisp of anticipation. Empress Wuchun was stunned when she heard this, and then she fell into silence. After a long time, she seemed to be at a loss for whether to laugh or cry, and she teased, "You're from Oracle Mountain, yet you don't know where it resides. If I hadn't confirmed your identity, I would wonder whether you're a true heir of Oracle Mountain." She was instantly slightly embarrassed, and he said, "My senior brothers and senior sisters were in too much of a hurry when they left the 3 dimensions, and they didn't tell me all of this." Empress Wuxia nodded to display her understanding, and then she suddenly said, "I know the answer, and it's very simple if you want me to tell you. But you have to agree to a condition of mine." She was stunned. "I have to agree to a condition of hers? After all, I only promised to guide you in your cultivation, and I never agreed to answer any other questions." Empress Wuxia had a slight grin on her face, and she seemed to be very happy to see Xianxia suffer. She felt that this little fellow was too calm and composed, and it seemed as if even the sky collapsing would be unable to shake his heart and soul. This sort of composure caused her to be unable to avoid feeling extremely surprised. "May I ask, Empress, if you can tell me the condition first and allow me to think about it?" Xianxia frowned as he spoke. "Of course. Actually, even if you didn't agree, I would still tell you what this condition is." Empress Wuxia readily agreed. She raised her clear eyes and looked into the distance. What she'd thought of was unknown, but her gaze couldn't help but reveal a trace of coldness that vanished in an instant, and then she recovered her composure. At the same time, her pleasant, clear, and low voice drifted out from this flat platform. "Just not long ago, a shocking piece of news spread throughout the Central Imperial region. New ancestral Tao roots have been born in the desolate Manchu ruins. Moreover, its quality has even attained the shocking level of the 9th grade of the Emperor rank, and it caused all the great powers to be stirred. According to my knowledge, the spirit god exalts fostered by many great powers in the Imperial region have already set out and headed to the desolate Manchu ruins, and they intend to seize that 9th grade Emperor rank ancestral Tao root. Supposedly, even the peerless figures in the top 10 of the Domain Enlightened chart are participating in this matter. The condition I want you to agree to is actually very simple. I want you to participate in this. It doesn't matter if you're able to seize this ancestral Tao root. The most important thing is that you absolutely can't allow that little fellow from the Gongya clan to obtain it." When she mentioned the Gongya clan, a wisp of hatred silently appeared in Empress Wuxia's voice, and it was piercingly cold like ice and caused one's heart to feel cold. Xianxia acutely noticed this, and he couldn't help but raise his brows. He guessed that there was probably some enmity between Empress Wuxia and the Gongya clan. Actually, even if we disregard all of this, with the potential of a spirit god exalt that you possess, then you must make a trip to the desolate Manchu ruins in order to charge into the universe enlightened ancestral god realm. Because only the desolate Manchu ruins possesses the ancestral Tao root that you require. Empress Wuxia glanced at Xianxia, and her voice had already returned to normal. The ancestral Tao root was the foundation to establish the universe enlightened ancestral god realm. Just like the sole divine flame that was lit ablaze at the world enlightened true god realm, and the divine Tao altar established at the world enlightened true god's realm. The ancestral Tao root was one of the signs of a universe enlightened ancestral god. Xianxia was very clearly aware of this, and what truly shocked him was that when he heard the words desolate Manchu ruins, he felt as if he'd been struck by lightning. He instantly recalled that row of obscure and mysterious words that had appeared on the river diagram fragments. Shockingly, the characters and that respectively referred to the words desolate and ruins were amongst them. During the process of fusing the river diagram fragments, rows of obscure and mysterious ancient characters had appeared on its surface on more than one occasion. On the other hand, with Xianxia's ability, he'd merely recognized 9 of those ancient characters until now, and they were respectively and during the Star Hunt meeting, he'd occasionally heard the name Central Imperial Region, and he faintly felt that the ancient characters that appeared on the river diagram fragment might be related to it. Because the characters and referred to the words Imperial and Region. However, when he found out about the desolate Manchu ruins from Empress Wuxia at this moment, he was instantly struck with a feeling that the clues provided by the river diagram fragments were related to this desolate Manchu ruins. This wasn't a random guess that was without any reason, and it came from a strong form of intuition. If he analyzed it carefully, it wasn't difficult to notice that no matter if it was the Central Imperial Region or the desolate Manchu ruins, both of them were extraordinary areas in the ancient god domain. The former was the central area of the 1,000+ regions within the ancient god domain, and there were countless extraordinary powers and unimaginably ancient sects there. Ordinary cultivators were utterly unable to arrive there. Even thought she didn't know anything about the latter. After he heard Empress Wuxia, he'd faintly understood that perhaps it wasn't so famous as the Central Imperial Region, yet it was absolutely an extraordinary place. After all, it was able to produce ancestral Tao roots, and it was able to draw over numerous spirit god exalts from the Imperial Region. So, it was absolutely not ordinary. It was precisely based on such an understanding that she had instantly connected all of this with the mysterious ancient characters that appeared on the river diagram fragments. Could it be that there's some sort of link between all of this? She's thought flowed swiftly. What's your decision? Empress Yuche couldn't help but feel slight wonder when she didn't kept silence for so long. As far as she was concerned, even if he intended to refuse, there was no need to consider for so long. She suddenly returned to his senses from his deep contemplation, and he briefly arranged his thoughts, yet he noticed he didn't have any thoughts about it at all. So, he instantly smiled bitterly and said, "Why did you choose me?" There are numerous reasons. For example, if you want to advance into the universe enlightened ancestral god realm, then you must make a trip to the desolate Manka ruins. Another reason is that if you want to find out where Oracle Mountain resides, then you must rely on this opportunity to enter the central imperial region. Empress Yuche spoke slowly. Not to mention that dealing with that little fellow from the Gongye clan is extremely beneficial to you. Shi instantly raised his brows. Who exactly is that fellow from the Gongye clan? He agreed with the first two reasons. After all, he was already clearly aware that if he who possessed the potential of a spirit god exalt wanted to advance into the universe enlightened ancestral god realm, then he did indeed have to head to the desolate Manka ruins. Because only the desolate Manka ruins could produce ancestral Tao roots that were suitable for spirit god exalts. Moreover, if she wanted to obtain an answer about how to head to Oracle Mountain from Empress Yuche, then he could only accept this condition. So, under such circumstances, she had actually started to accept all of this. Otherwise, he would be concerned about exactly who that fellow from the Gongye clan was. Gongye Zhifu. Empress Yuche spoke indifferently. This little fellow is the most outstanding genius of the Gongye clan in the recent years, and he has ascended onto the 9th position on the Domain Enlightened chart. He's a renowned figure in the entire imperial region. She paused for a moment and continued. Gongye Zhifu's objective in the desolate Manka ruins is the same as the other spirit god exalts, and it's to seize that newly born 9th grade emperor rank ancestral Tao root. Moreover, based on his current ability, his hopes of success are extremely great. Gongye Zhifu, the most outstanding genius in the Gongye clan's younger generation and ranked at the 9th position on the Domain Enlightened chart. Merely listening to these words allowed Shi to be clearly aware of exactly how extraordinary this extremely dazzling and peerless genius was. When compared to him, that 13th son of Imperial Emperor Go-chan, Sun Yongping, instantly dimmed in comparison. After all, one of them was ranked at the 9th position on the Domain Enlightened chart while the other was only at the 76th position, and the gap between their strengths was obvious. Shi smiled bitterly again when he heard this. This Empress Yuche really thinks highly of me. She actually wants me to deal with such a freak. Even though he only had to stop Gongye Zhifu from seizing the 9th grade emperor rank ancestral Tao root, she was very clearly aware that this requirement wasn't much easier than killing Gongye Zhifu. No, this condition is too dangerous. Unless Empress agrees to a condition of my own. She took a deep breath, and he pondered deeply for a moment and said, "No, 2 conditions. Speak." Empress Yuche didn't hesitate at all. Not to mention 2 conditions. So long as I can accomplish it, then I'll agree to everything. She couldn't help but be stunned, and then he instantly understood that he had to agree to her request. For a time, he swiftly pondered in his mind, and then he said, "I need a large batch of divine materials to refine a treasure. That's the first condition." "All right, no problem." Empress Yuche agreed readily. It was only some divine materials, and it was nothing to someone of her status. The second condition is to allow that little girl, Tai Yunping, to cultivate by your side. When he noticed how readily she agreed, he didn't hesitate any longer and swiftly spoke of his second condition. Empress Yuche couldn't help but glance at Shi with slight surprise, and she said, "I never expected that you would be rather doting towards her. Do you know that her natural talent in cultivation isn't good, and even if she follows by my side, it'll be impossible for her to undergo a tremendous change in a short period of time." Shi smiled and said, "I understand, but I attach more importance towards her willpower and disposition. One day, she'd definitely shock the world." Empress Yuche seemed to be lost in thought, and she said, "You're not wrong. All right, I agree." Xianxia cupped his hands and said, "Then thank you, Empress. Do you have any other conditions?" Empress Yuche said, "Truthfully speaking, these two conditions aren't really difficult to me, and it makes me feel bad." Xianxia shook his head. "Perhaps it's as easy as lifting your hand to you, but it's already an extraordinary great kindness to me." A wisp of admiration couldn't help but suffuse Empress Yuche's eyes. He's free from arrogance and impetuousness, is neither humble nor pushy, knows where to stop, and understands honor and disgrace. This little fellow's character is extremely rare. Only Oracle Mountain can foster such an heir. There's no time to lose. I'll go prepare the divine materials for you right now, and you can seize this opportunity to make sufficient preparations. I'll ask Yunqing to send you to the desolate Manka ruins 1 month from now. After she gave him these instructions, Empress Yuche stood up, and she asked for a list of the divine materials he required before leaving swiftly. "Senior, are you really leaving?" Within a quiet abode, Tai Yunping spoke in a low voice, and her pretty face revealed reluctance and a sense of loss. "I've already promised Empress Yuche, and this trip will be filled with danger, so it's unsuitable to bring you along with me." She was slightly unable to bear doing this. Actually, he felt slight admiration towards Tai Yunping, and he saw a shadow of himself during his youth in her. She was persistent and reserved just like him. "Don't worry, cultivating by Empress Yuche's side would absolutely be better than cultivating by my side. Once you've become accomplished in your cultivation, you can come see me at any time." "Yes, I'll listen to Senior." Tai Yunping took a deep breath, and she restrained the various feelings in her heart as she nodded and spoke. She smiled. "Then it's settled. I'll be going to prepare myself. You rest at ease here and cultivate. There'll be absolutely no one that dares to come looking for trouble with you while you stay here." As he spoke, she turned around and left. "Senior, I'll definitely become strong one day. At that time, you don't have to leave me behind like this." As she watched Xianxia's tall figure vanish outside the abode, Tai Yunping was instantly unable to control her emotions, and she muttered involuntarily while her eyes were already moist with tears. During these days of living together with Xianxia, she'd long since taken Xianxia to be a senior and someone dear to her. She'd learned too much under Xianxia's guidance, and she'd felt care, concern, and protection that she'd never felt in the past. This was simply like a dream to someone like her who'd been born impoverished and had no one to rely on since a young age. Yet now, she seemed to have to awaken from this dream in the end. Dragonscale Cold Steel, Inkjade Chaotic Herb, Kifuse Herb, Jadelight Release Rock. On that very night, Empress Yuche sent her subordinates to prepare all the divine materials she required. There was a total of 372 materials, and even single one of them were extremely rare and precious divine materials of shocking value. It was even to the extent that based on their price on the market, the total value of these divine materials even surpassed the value of a good quality natural spirit treasure. Yet at this moment, this superb collection of divine materials were piled up into a hill before Xianxia, and he couldn't help but sigh with emotion. As the region lord of the entire Snow Ink region, Empress Yuche's efficiency really is terrifying. If he were to purchase these materials himself, then it would probably be impossible for him to gather all of these divine materials within a single day. Without any hesitation, Xianxia withdrew the talisman armament, and just like in the past, he started to refine the divine materials. The method to refine a talisman armament was a special secret technique that remained only within Oracle Mountain, and it was completely different from most treasures in the world. Because it didn't just possess extraordinary might, it possessed the ability to improve without bounds. Merely this aspect was something that other treasures were absolutely unable to compare to. But at the same time, refining a talisman armament and improving its quality consumed a huge amount of divine materials, and this sort of consumption was even a few times greater than other treasures. Just like this very moment, if all of these divine materials were utilized to refine an artificial spirit treasure, then it could even be refined into 7 or 8 mid-rank divine artifacts. However, when utilized to refine the talisman armament, These divine materials were merely able to improve the talisman armament's might to be slightly superior to a 6th-grade mid-rank divine artifact, and it would be slightly inferior to a 7th-grade high-rank divine artifact. However, the results that Xianxia received in exchange for paying such a price was extremely shocking as well. At the very least, the talisman armament's might could occupy a position of absolute advantage amongst mid-rank divine artifacts. Moreover, mid-rank divine artifacts were at the exact quality that domain-enlightened spirit gods could control perfectly, and if its quality grew any higher, then it would be slightly strenuous to utilize. Xianxia was very indifferent towards all of this, and he didn't think too much about it. His only understanding towards all of this was that once he succeeded in refining the talisman armament this time, then it would be sufficient to bring forth his entire strength, and he would at least be around 30% stronger. A 30% improvement of strength. This was already an extremely shocking improvement. If it was in an actual battle, then not to mention an improvement of 30%, even 10% improvement was sufficient to change the situation of the battle. For example, when Xianxia fought Sun Yongping earlier, he was in a slightly defensive position because the talisman armament in his possession couldn't compare to Sun Yongping's natural spirit treasure. If it wasn't for that, Xianxia's combat strength would have been sufficient to easily bash Sun Yongping up. Similarly, if he refined the talisman armament successfully, then not to mention Sun Yongping, who was ranked at the 76th position on the Domain Enlightened chart, Xianxia wouldn't have a fear an even stronger opponent with a higher ranking. 1 month later, clang! A sword howl resounded like a dragon leaving its lair, and it sounded like the tune of nature rumbling through the air. It carried a peerlessly grand tune of the Tao that shook the soul. After that, a wisp of a black-colored bolt of lightning soared into the sky like a torrent. It transformed into an ordinary black-colored divine sword that was completely translucent and clean. Strands of obscure and dense talismans enshrouded it, and it caused the sword to seem even more mysterious and terrifying. Swish! Swish! One could clearly notice that even though the talisman armament was floating in the sky without moving at all, the space in its surroundings was collapsing inch by inch into pieces before transforming into ripples that surged without end. In other words, even if Xianxia didn't utilize the talisman armament, merely its own might was sufficient to crush space and destroy the 5 elements. This was the talisman armament after it was refined once more. Its might was so formidable that it even exceeded Xianxia's expectations and could compare to a high-rank artificial spirit treasure. However, when it was utilized, it wasn't as strenuous as when one utilized a high-rank artificial spirit treasure. Xianxia opened his mouth, and then the talisman armament suddenly transformed into a sword-shaped talisman that was the size of an infant's fist before it entered into his body. When he refined the talisman armament this time, Xianxia hadn't just consumed all of those rare divine materials. He'd even utilized the infinite divine talisman within his body to deduce the numerous divine Tao laws he possessed and transform them into all sorts of divine talismans. In the end, he inscribed all of them onto the talisman armament. This caused the talisman armament to undergo a complete and shocking transforming. It could transform into the shape of various weapons according to Xianxia's will, and it possessed boundless variations and unfathomable might. Not bad. Merely based on its current might, it would be sufficient to be utilized against opponents that possess natural spirit treasures. A wisp of a satisfied smile arose on the corners of Xianxia's mouth. It was actually very difficult to make a distinction between natural spirit treasures and artificial spirit treasures, and if it was in terms of offensive ability alone, then the talisman armament was actually not much inferior to a natural spirit treasure. Of course, it was an entirely different story if it was compared to the Avicii Hellsword and Sky Ruin Sword in Empress Yuche's possession. Once one attained a cultivation like Xianxia's, one's own strength was regarded as most important, and the might of divine artifacts was merely for the sake of supporting one in battle. Moreover, one couldn't fully rely on divine artifacts because this would overturn the correct order of things. After all, even though divine artifacts were formidable, when compared to one's own cultivation, comprehension of the Tao, and combat experience, it was just an external source of strength in the end, and it could only be taken to be a means of battle. Oracle Mountain's talisman armaments really do deserve their reputation. Right at this moment, a clear, pleasant, and low voice suddenly sounded out from afar. After that, Empress Wuxia, who wore a red dress, arrived abruptly. As usual, she wore a phoenix crown and wore a robe embroidered with phoenixes, and she had a slender and graceful figure. Empress Chun, she stood up and cupped his hands. How is it? Are you prepared? Asked Empress Wuxia. We can take action. Chun, she nodded because it was already at the agreed upon time. This is all the information I gathered during this time. You can read through it on the way. Perhaps it'll be of help to you when you enter the desolate Manka ruins. Empress Wuxia passed a jade slip to Xianxia, and then she walked swiftly towards the distance. Come with me. Yun Qing has already been waiting for a long time. Qian, she couldn't be bothered to look through the jade slip in his hand, and he hurriedly followed up to her. Outside Water Cloud Palace. It was covered in an expanse of silence because along with the Star Hunt meeting coming to an end, all the participating disciples had left, and this place had returned once more to its peaceful state. At this moment, that old man, Yun Qing, was standing before Water Cloud Palace. No matter if you succeed or not, remember that your life is the most important. Because if anything happens to you, then the Oracle Mountain would probably not let the matter rest. After they walked out of Water Cloud Palace, Empress Wuxia joked. Chun, she smiled and nodded to display that he understood. Yun Qing, I'll entrust you with everything else. Empress Wuxia looked at Yun Qing. Remember, you must send Chun Shi over safely. Yes. Yun Qing nodded. He didn't say much, but Chun Shi was very clearly aware that this old man's ability to carry out his orders was absolutely assuring. Then both of you should leave right now. Yun Qing will wait for your victorious return from the desolate Manka ruins. Empress Wuxia's eyes were clear like water, and she stared at Chun Shi. Take care of yourself. Chun Shi cupped his hands, and then he turned around and followed Yun Qing. Swoosh! After a short moment, a bronze carriage smashed open the clouds, tore through space, and instantly vanished into the depths of the universe. Little girl, let's return. After standing there and staring into the distance for a long time, Empress Wuxia spoke in a light voice. Since an unknown moment in time, Tai Yunping was already standing by her side. Yes. Tai Yunping lowered her head and replied, and then she didn't make another sound. She wasn't willing to allow Empress Wuxia to see the sadness and sense of loss on her face. However, Empress Wuxia was an extraordinary figure. She didn't have to look at all before she could sense Tai Yunping's feelings. It was unknown what Empress Wuxia had thought off, but she suddenly sighed faintly while a wisp of a gentle expression suffused her clear eyes. She patted Tai Yunping on the shoulder and said, Little girl, when you stop caring one day, that would be the most painful and numbing moment. As soon as she finished speaking, she placed her hands behind her back, and then she turned around and left while her graceful figure seemed lonely. Tai Yunping was stunned, and then she raised her head to glance at Empress Wuxia's figure with wonder. She said in her heart, could it be that a great figure like her has unforgettable pain in her heart as well? Swish! Space surged as the bronze carriage passed through it, and the 4 ink jade stags that pulled the carriage were extraordinary and magnificent. This carriage belonged to Empress Wuxia, and it was called Ink Unicorn Carriage. It was even on par with Imperial Monarch Gochen's Cloud Fragrance Carriage. This carriage could travel through over 1,000 universes and traverse 10 regions in a single day. Its speed was so swift that it could be considered to be astonishing. At the very least, with Chun Shi's current ability, he was utterly unable to compare with the speed of this carriage while relying on teleportation. Yet for the sake of this journey, Empress Wuxia had even lent this carriage to Chun Shi, and it obviously showed how highly she valued Chun Shi. Yun Qing's expression was indifferent as he concentrated on steering the carriage, whereas Chun Shi sat all by himself within the carriage and was reading through the jade slip that Empress Wuxia had given him. The jade slip provided an introduction of the rough situation within the desolate Manka ruins. This allowed Chun Shi to notice to his shock that the desolate Manka ruins was actually at the easternmost border of the ancient god domain. Strictly speaking, the desolate Manka ruins wasn't part of the ancient god domain, and it was in a boundless, unknown region. An unknown region was a region that still hadn't been exploded. For example, some great powers captured godslaves and send them to these unknown regions for the sake of unearthing even more territories and resources. However, Xianxia was puzzled because since the desolate Mancha ruins had been discovered by the cultivators of the ancient god domain, then why had no one taken possession of it? In next to no time, Xianxia obtained the answer to his question from the jade slip. The reason was that the environment within the desolate Mancha ruins was extremely adverse, and it was filled with numerous strange and mysterious areas that were extraordinarily dangerous. Since the ancient times until now, there were numerous large powers that had tried to take possession of it, yet all of them returned empty-handed. This included some ancient powers from the imperial region. However, Xianxia felt slightly at ease because even though the desolate Mancha ruins was terrifying, it would enter into a dormant period after a certain period of time. During this period of time, the dangers within it would reduce greatly, and cultivators could safely enter and explore it. Perhaps I'll be able to find out if the desolate Mancha ruins is related to the ancient characters on the river diagram fragments once I arrive there. After a long time, Xianxia placed the jade slip away, and he seemed to be lost in thought. He didn't really have much confidence towards this mission. After all, based on what Empress Wuxia said, all the people entering the desolate Mancha ruins this time were spirit god exalts, and practically all of them were from ancient powers in the imperial region. Under such circumstances, no one could guarantee that a conflict wouldn't erupt between them and another after entering the desolate Mancha ruins. So, Xianxia had no choice but to be extremely cautious. Gongye Zhifu. For no reason or rhyme, Xianxia thought of this name once more. Now, he was finally clearly aware that the Gongye clan which Gongye Zhifu was from had an extremely close relationship with the sovereign sect. It was even to the extent that many great figures from the Gongye clan had assumed extremely important positions in the sovereign clan. They could be said to possess monstrous authority. This was the reason why Empress Wuxia said that dealing with Gongye Zhifu was extremely beneficial to Xianxia. This also allowed Xianxia to have a deeper understanding of exactly how formidable the forces of the sovereign sect within the ancient god domain were, and they could be said to be scattered throughout the world. The only thing that still puzzled Xianxia was the relationship between the three dimensions and the ancient god domain. No matter if it was Oracle Mountain, Nuwasdao Palace, or the sovereign sect, they'd clearly gained a foothold in the ancient god domain since a long time ago, yet why did they attach such importance to the three dimensions? If the three dimensions was like the lower dimensions that the cultivators of the ancient god domain were disdainful towards, then why would it have an inseparable relationship with the three great sects? There's definitely a reason behind all of this. Xianxia was extremely sure about this. However, he was still unable to obtain an exact answer with the knowledge he currently possessed. Half a month later, Xianxia suddenly woke up from his meditation. Right at this moment, the ink unicorn carriage he resided in had suddenly stopped. At the same time, Yun Qing's aged and indifferent voice resounded from the outside. "Young Master Xianxia, we've arrived at Phoenix Perch City." "We've arrived." Xianxia was stunned, and then he stood up and walked out of the carriage. Sure enough, he noticed a city standing towering extremely far away in the sky. It was brilliant, vast, and boundlessly magnificent. It was like a kingdom that was constructed in the sky. This was Phoenix Perch City, a city that was constructed at the easternmost border of the ancient god domain, and it had been standing towering here for countless years. Further east from Phoenix Perch City was the famous god burial ocean. The desolate Mancha ruins was supposedly in an area within the god burial ocean. Phoenix Perch City. This ancient city that was constructed above the sky and at the peak of the clouds was extremely vast. It was completely suffused in a light golden color, and it was magnificent and grand. This was the place where cultivators resided during explorations, and it was the one and only city at the easternmost border of the ancient god domain. The god burial ocean lay further east, and it wasn't within the scope of the ancient god domain any longer. Because the god burial ocean was unlike any other ordinary ocean. It stretched practically boundlessly into the unknown, and it was an unknown region. It wasn't exaggerated to say that it was an ocean that was even vaster than a universe, and it was even to the extent that one could find numerous dazzling stars within its ocean water. It was even to the extent that there were rumors that said it wasn't just the corpses of gods that were buried within the god burial ocean, and there were countless universes buried within it as well. This obviously showed how vast the god burial ocean was. It was absolutely beyond imagination. It was precisely because of this that the territory of the ancient god domain stopped abruptly at this point, and it was unable to expand any further. The reason was that the god burial ocean had stopped it here. In the recent period of time, along with the news of the 9th grade emperor rank ancestral Dao root spreading, the desolate Mancha ruins that resided at a certain spot within the god burial ocean had once again become the center of attention of all. On the other hand, Phoenix Perch City that lay at the banks of the god burial ocean had suddenly become bustling because of this piece of news. There were cultivators that traveled over here from various different regions every single day, and they were waiting for the moment the desolate Mancha ruins re-emerged into the world. They were waiting for their opportunity to fight for the emperor rank ancestral Dao root. Young Master Xianxia, the god burial ocean will enter a dormant period in half a month from now. At that time, it'll be exactly the best time to head to the desolate Mancha ruins. So, during this period of time, all the cultivators that intend to head to the desolate Mancha ruins can only stay in Phoenix Perch City and wait. Yunqing kept the ink unicorn carriage away, and then he led Xianxia towards Phoenix Perch City. Moreover, he described the situation here as he walked. Xianxia listened silently, and his gaze frequently sized up the surroundings. This city in the sky was completely different from similar cities he'd seen in the past. It was vast and grand. No matter if it was the streets or the buildings, they were filled with an ancient aura. It was the marks of time, the passage of history. Practically all the people on the streets were cultivators. There were humans, and there were formidable living beings of all shapes and sizes that came from other races. But the most common were god-slaves. Batch after batch of shabbily clothed god-slaves, who had haggard and apathetic expressions, were placed within numerous vessels and transported here. After that, they were escorted away by some experts at the god-rank realm who were already waiting there, and they were sent to various different slave camps throughout the city. Merely throughout this period that he walked into the city with Yunqing, he'd seen no less than over 100 vessels, and countless god-slaves were escorted here. Such a scene was extremely shocking. All of these god-slaves are from the lower dimensions, and they were captured by the powers of the various universes in the ancient god domain. After that, they were restrained and escorted here by force. The purpose of this is for the sake of making these god-slaves head to the unknown region to explore new territories and resources. Yunqing said indifferently, "Normally, most of these god-slaves will lose their lives in the unknown regions. Even if some are lucky enough to survive, they'll mostly be reduced to slaves that can only work to their death for a great power." Xianxia frowned while an uncomfortable feeling faintly arose in his heart. He was very clearly aware that if he didn't possess sufficient strength at that time, then he would have probably been captured by the Dei clan upon entering the last day's domain and would be reduced to a god-slave. So, when he witnessed such a scene and had Yunqing's explanation, Xianxia had rather complicated feelings that included a heavy feeling and feelings of detest. However, Xianxia was clearly aware that such situations were occurring in practically every corner of the ancient god domain, and to those living beings of the ancient god domain, they'd long since become accustomed to such scenes. So, it was utterly impossible for him to change anything by himself. Just like Yunqing who stood before him. Wasn't Yunqing a god-slave by Empress Yu Che's side as well? Perhaps the only difference between Yunqing and those god-slaves that were sent to Phoenix Perch City was that their fates were completely different. If I'm able to possess the strength to control the situation within the entire ancient god domain one day, then perhaps such matters wouldn't occur in the future? Xianxia took a deep breath, and he restrained the complicated feelings in his heart and stopped thinking about it, because it was useless no matter how much he thought about it now. After that, Xianxia lost all interest to tour and enjoy Phoenix Perch City, and both of them directly arrived at a place called Heaven Origin Pavilion under Yunqing's lead. They booked 2 abodes before they got together at the hall on the first floor and ordered some food and drink, and then they started chatting idly. Heaven Origin Pavilion was the largest restaurant in Phoenix Perch City. Supposedly, its owner was an extraordinary power in the imperial region. Thus no one had dared to cause trouble here throughout the years of its existence. At this moment, the hall on the first floor was filled with guests. All of them were cultivators that wore luxurious clothes and had extraordinary bearings. because it was impossible for those who could enjoy themselves here to be ordinary figures, as merely the prices here weren't something that ordinary cultivators could afford. The hall on the first floor was extremely clamorous because the guests on practically every table were discussing the desolate Mancha ruins. The situation is slightly bad. According to my knowledge, another 3 spirit god exalts have arrived from the Imperial region on just today alone. The Yu clan's Yuqiu Jing, the Kunwu clan's Kunwu Qing, and the Zhuanyu clan's Zhuanyu Shui. They're respectively ranked at the 16th, 19th, and 23rd position on the Domain Enlightened chart. Indeed, if we include the 9 spirit god exalts that arrived a few days ago, an entire 12 spirit god exalts have gathered in Phoenix Perch City. How could such an unprecedentedly rare scene occur in the past? Alas, all of you're only talking about those spirit god exalts that have shown themselves, and we don't know how many spirit god exalts are in the shadows. I truly feel so helpless. Peerless geniuses that usually rarely seen have converged successively in Phoenix Perch City lately. In this way, it's obvious how brutal the competition would be. So, it'll probably be extremely difficult for us to obtain even some benefits from the desolate Mancha ruins. It's all because of the 9th grade Emperor rank ancestral Dao root. I wonder which damnable bastard exposed the news about it, causing the cultivators in Phoenix Perch City to increase with each passing day. If this continues, then the situation would become more and more disadvantageous to ordinary domain enlightened spirit gods like us. Indeed, the most damnable part is that the God Burial Ocean will only enter a dormant period after another half a month of time. If it wasn't for that, I would have set out and headed to the desolate Mancha ruins since a long time ago. How could I have possibly been waiting helplessly and anxiously here? Haha! I forgot to tell you that according to my knowledge the Gongye clan's Gongye Zhifu will be arriving today as well. What? Gongye Zhifu is really coming? Gongye Zhifu. When Gongye Zhifu's name was mentioned, the sounds of discussion on the first floor instantly became clamorous, and there was no lack of voices of surprise and shock. Xianxia heard all of this clearly, and he couldn't help but sigh with emotion in his heart. Merely Sun Yongping was capable of causing all of those cultivators from Snow Ink region to be so shocked on that day. If they witnessed such a scene, exactly what would they feel? Yes, there were too many spirit god exalts gathered in Phoenix Perch City now. It was beyond imagination, and it would probably cause an extraordinary uproar no matter where it occurred in the ancient god domain. After all, it was spirit god exalts that were 1 in a million and extremely rare in the world. Every single one of them was a dazzling and matchless genius. Presently, all of these extremely dazzling geniuses had gathered here successively, so it was impossible for it to not cause an uproar. On the other hand, this displayed exactly how attractive the 9th grade Emperor rank ancestral Dao root was because even spirit god exalts were unable to refuse its temptation. Yuqiu Jing, Kunwu Qing, Zhuanyu Shui. Xianxia silently pondered on the information related to them in his heart. In Xianxia's opinion, only experts that similarly possessed the potential of a spirit god exalt could make him take them seriously. For example, these 3 names respectively represented the experts that were ranked at the 16th, 19th, and 23rd position on the Domain Enlightened chart. Merely based on their rankings alone, it was obvious how formidable their strengths were, and they were outstanding geniuses even amongst spirit god exalts. The Jade Slip Empress Yuche gave Chun she had some information related to these 3 people recorded in it. It could be said that all 3 of them were from ancient clans in the Imperial region, and all of their backgrounds were extremely shocking. When one competed with such figures, one even had no choice but to consider the consequences of offending them and whether the powers that stood behind such figures would turn hostile towards one. The Imperial region is the most prosperous core region of the entire ancient god domain, and there are countless ancient powers within it. Even though the Yu clan, Kunwu clan, and Zhuanyu clan can't compare to those ancient powers, they're considered first-rate existences. Every single one of their clans has existed for over 10 million years now, and they can be said to be colossi. As if he'd seen through Xianxia's thoughts, Yunqing explained via voice transmission. However, you don't have to worry about all of this. You only have to obstruct that Gongye Zhifu this time. Yunqing paused for a moment and continued. Not to mention that with your background, You don't have to fear these powers at all. The meaning behind his words was that Xianxia was an heir of Oracle Mountain. So Xianxia didn't have to consider the consequences of offending them at all. Xianxia couldn't help but be stunned, and then he seemed to be lost in thought, because merely these words allowed him to have a better understanding of the forces of Oracle Mountain in the ancient god domain. Meanwhile, a wave of clamorous noises suddenly arose from outside Heaven Origin Pavilion, and then a man and a woman walked side by side into the first level. The man was rather tall, and he had violet pupils, silver hair, and a peerlessly handsome appearance. He wore a black robe and his skin was fair like jade. As he strode in, he naturally emanated an oppressive and sharp aura that was extremely terrifying. When they saw the appearance of this man, the clamorous hall instantly became deathly silent while the faces of everyone revealed a wisp of shock. Xianxia couldn't help but glance over as well. Unfortunately, he didn't know the man, and it was an entirely unfamiliar face to him. However, when his gaze flashed past the man and descended onto the woman by the man's side, his gaze instantly froze on the spot, and then his pupils constricted abruptly while his entire body stiffened. Because of the arrival of that man and woman, the atmosphere within the entire hall had suddenly become deathly silently. The gazes of everyone had converged onto the young man with violet pupils and silver hair, and their expressions more or less carried a trace of shock. On the other hand, at the instant Xianxia's gaze descended onto the woman, he was unable to move it away any longer. His pupils had dilated while his heart couldn't help but tremble. Even his body had stiffened at this instant, and he was stunned on the spot. The woman wore a black dress and soft supple skin, and her dense jet-black hair was held in a bun by a wooden hairpin, causing a clear and pretty oval face to be revealed. She had a graceful bearing and slender waist. As she stood there casually, she naturally emanated a form of tranquil and natural beauty, and she was like a pure snow lotus on a precipice. Xianxia. Xianxia swore that the woman he saw at this moment was definitely Xianxia because her appearance and bearing was simple and elegant like it was in the past. However, Xianxia had never expected that after so many years apart, he would actually meet her in Phoenix Perch City within the ancient god domain. Besides causing him to be taken by surprise, he felt as if he was struck by lightning, causing him to be stunned on the spot. The scenes from the past flashed within his mind. All those years ago, while they were heading to the dark reverie from the primeval battlefield, Xianxia had been taken away by her senior brother, Heaven Trampler. From that day onwards, no matter if it was in the dark reverie or after he entered the immortal dimension, Xianxia had never met her again. In the past, he'd found out about the divine abyss of darkness within the prehistoric ruins, and he knew that Xianxia and her master, Taoist Dao Ke, resided there. However, when he headed over there to look for her, he found out from Heaven Trampler that Xianxia had already left with their master, Taoist Dao Ke, since a long time ago. Later on, after he became the Dean of Dao Emperor Academy, Xianxia hadn't given up on searching for Xianxia. Unfortunately, she seemed as if she'd evaporated from the world, and she was impossible to find. Yet now, she'd actually appeared in Phoenix Perch City. So, how could Xianxia not be shocked and surprised by this? But in next to no time, all of these emotions were replaced by a wisp of wild joy and excitement. Because Xianxia was truly overjoyed at being able to encounter Xianxia here. His gaze wasn't calm any longer, and it carried a wisp of undisguised happiness. At practically the exact same moment, Xianxia seemed to have noticed something as well, and she turned her head towards Xianxia. However, she merely took a glance before she turned away, and she seemed as if she didn't know Xianxia at all. Xianxia couldn't help but be slightly stunned by this. Could it be that she didn't recognize me? He couldn't help but stand up and speak out. Miss Xian. The atmosphere in the hall was originally deathly silent. So when Xianxia suddenly stood up at this moment and greeted Xianxia, it instantly drew the attention of everyone. At practically the exact same time, the eyes of the silver-haired young man narrowed. He glanced at the woman by his side, and then glanced at Xianxia who stood in the distance, and he seemed to be filled with interest. At this moment, Yunqing was shocked as well. However, when he noticed that Xianxia was only greeting the black-clothed woman, he heaved a sigh of relief. At the same time, he couldn't help but be slightly puzzled. Could it be that this kid knows her? Young master, it seems that you've mistaken me for someone else? The woman in a black dress frowned, and her clear and pretty face was still so tranquil as it was just now. I've mistaken her for someone else? Xianxia's face froze. He stared at Zhen Luqing for a long time before he said with a smile, Miss Zhen, are you joking? Joking? The woman's willow leaf-shaped brows furrowed even more tightly, and she said with slight displeasure, Young master, I don't joke with people I don't know. Xianxia's heart sank, and he was slightly surprised and bewildered. Could it be that I've really mistaken her for Zhen Luqing? On the other hand, at this moment, the gazes everyone within the hall shot at Chun. She had transformed from merely carrying surprise to carrying a trace of doubt as well. It was an extremely strange expression. You know her name? Suddenly, the young man spoke in a low and feminine voice, and it carried a trace of unique charm. The woman in a black dress seemed to have noticed something, and she turned around and said to the young man by her side, I'm slightly tired. I want to find a place to rest for a while. As she spoke, she turned around with the intention of leaving. Wait a moment. It looks to me like this fellow Taoist knows you rather well. The young man pulled on the woman's arm and grinned as he spoke. The woman's entire body stiffened, and she intended to struggle free from him, yet she stopped in the end. However, her expression was slightly gloomy. Xianxia's brows raised. He glanced at the young man before glancing at the woman, and he said, If I'm not wrong, then this young miss is definitely my good friend, Zhen Luqing. A wisp of an arc suddenly arose on the corners of the young man's mouth, and he glanced at Xianxia with a ridiculing smile as he said, You're right. Her name really is Zhen Luqing. All the people in the hall were stunned upon hearing this, and they were bewildered by this scene. Could it be that kid really knows that woman? But if that's true, then why did that woman act like she doesn't know him? Such thoughts couldn't help but arise in everyone's hearts. Could it be that there was something between that woman and that kid? Now that she has someone new, she'd intentionally acting as if she doesn't know him? In an instant, all of them felt excited. They were clearly aware of how shocking that young man's identity was. If that kid really was an old love of the woman by the young man's side, then there would truly be a show for them to watch. Yes, my name really is Zhen Luqing, but I truly don't know you. If you continue acting in this way, then don't blame me for being merciless. The woman's clear eyes glanced over like bolts of lightning, and she glanced coldly at Xianxia while revealing a wisp of rage. At this moment, the excitement and happiness in Xianxia's heart had gone cold, especially when he saw Zhen Luqing act as if she didn't know him at all. His heart felt slightly cold, and it was like he'd been doused with a pail of cold water. He'd never imagined that the matter would actually develop to such an extent. Not had he imagined that Zhen Luqing would actually be so heartless. She was absolutely not like this in the past. After all, while they were in the Darchu dynasty, she'd actually given up her qualifications to fight Qingshui in the all-star meeting for him. Yet now, she'd actually acted like she didn't know him. The more he thought about this, the more his heart was in chaos, and he felt a form of indescribable pain, causing his expression to gradually become gloomy. He wasn't an amorous person, and he just attached extreme importance towards his ties of friendship all along the way. Not to mention that his relationship with Zhen Luqing had long since surpassed the bounds of an ordinary relationship. Now, after finally meeting so many years later, she greeted him with a cold and indifferent expression and acted as if she didn't know him. Such an enormous blow caused Xianxia to be unable to accept this reality for some time. Why has this happened? She has clearly admitted that she's Zhen Luqing, yet why does she just happen to not know me? Xianxia suddenly took a deep breath. His gaze was like a bolt of lightning as he glanced at the young man by her side, and then his gaze descended once more onto Zhen Luqing as he said in a low voice, Is it because of him? Or perhaps there's something you're unable to speak about that's causing you to have no choice but to act in this way. As he finished speaking, his voice carried a trace of hope. He really hoped that it was because of some secret, and she wouldn't mercilessly refuse to recognize him as someone she knew. How laughable! There's probably something wrong with you? Jin Luqing laughed coldly. These words alone caused Xianxi's heart to feel heavy to the point it was difficult to breathe, and he couldn't help but clench his fists tightly and try hard to control his emotions. All right, fellow Taoist, we don't have time to play with you. The young man suddenly grinned, and then he raised his hand and pulled Jin Luqing into his embrace, and then he gazed at Xianxi and teased. Besides that, if you want to pursue a woman in the future, then you must choose the right target. I'll let it go this time, but if it occurs another time, then the consequences will be extremely severe. At the instant he saw Jin Luqing enter into the young man's embrace, Xianxi felt like pins were piercing into his heart. An indescribable rage surged from his heart. He was on the verge of being unable to restrain himself from making a move against the young man. Yet when he glanced at Jin Luqing's expression, his heart instantly became icy cold, as if he'd fallen into an icy pit. From the beginning until the end, she hadn't struggled at all, and it was even to the extent that her face carried a wisp of an intimate expression. Crack! Xianxi clenched his fists to the point his knuckles cracked and turned while, and his eyes were icy cold to the limit. The young man with violet pupils and silver hair couldn't help but smile even more brilliantly when he saw this, and he glanced at Xianxi with a gaze of pity. After that, he held Jin Luqing's waist as he turned around and slowly headed up to the second floor. On the other hand, from the beginning until the end, Jin Luqing hadn't turned around. Xianxi stood there like a statue with an icy cold expression. No one knew what sort of pain and struggle he'd experienced in his heart, or what sort of rage, hatred, and frustration he'd felt. When the young man left with Jin Luqing, the atmosphere in the hall instantly changed, and it became clamorous and bustling once more. However, the topics of their conversations had already changed. Haha, that kid actually tried to get something he was unworthy of obtaining. Doesn't he know who she belongs to? One should choose the right time to talk to a girl. He just had to flirt with Gongye Zhifu's woman right before Gongye Zhifu himself. Isn't that like courting death? It looks to me like this fellow lost his mind from seeing such a beauty. His composure really is too weak. He even dared to try and seize Gongye Zhifu's woman. That's simply like playing with his life. Fortunately, Gongye Zhifu was broad-minded and didn't get infuriated. Otherwise, how could he still be alive? Indeed, Gongye Zhifu probably couldn't be bothered to make a fuss about it with a nobody like him, right? Actually, do any of you know that kid? Nope, but he's definitely not a disciple of noble descent from the imperial region. Otherwise, how could he possibly not even know Gongye Zhifu? All of these discussions were like buzzing flies, and it caused Xianxi's expression to become even gloomier. He didn't mind being ridiculed and mocked by others, yet he was unable to accept this feeling of practically being betrayed. Gongye Zhifu. Xianxi took a deep breath and worked hard to allow himself to maintain his calm, and he turned around and sat silently on the spot, while a wisp of gloominess that was impossible to eliminate still remained in the space between his brows. Haha, I never expected that my target this time has become Jin Luqing's companion, and it's even to the extent that she acted like she didn't know me just for his sake. Xianxi suddenly felt like laughing. He felt this fate was intentionally playing tricks on him, or perhaps it was punishing him. It was punishing him for not looking for Jin Luqing throughout all these years. No matter what, you have to find out the answer to some things, especially when it's related to feelings. Don't do it for the sake of turning the situation around, and do it merely for the sake of providing yourself with release from it. Yunqing looked silently at Xianxi for a long time before he finally spoke. His eyes carried a wisp of wisdom that could only be tempered through age and experience. Of course, the outcome might be a pleasant surprise. Who knows? Xianxi remained silent while he felt complicated emotions in his heart. In the end, he nodded, and he didn't say anything before he stood up and walked out of Heaven Origin Pavilion. He wanted to be alone for a while. Phoenix Perch City was extremely vast. Its streets branched out in all directions, and every single tile, brick, plant, tree, it was entirely suffused with an ancient aura. Xianxi placed his hands behind his back as he walked aimlessly through the bustling crowd by himself. Perhaps because he'd experienced too many bumps and storms since a young age, Xianxia had always been restrained and even passive when it came to emotions. However, it didn't mean that he was numb and oblivious to it. He was clearly aware of Zhen Liuqing's feelings towards him since the time when they were still at the Darchu dynasty. Perhaps anyone could fall for another after a long time, and Xianxia could understand this. But he was unable to accept such an outcome. They were clearly so close in the past, yet she refused to acknowledge him now, and they seemed like people that didn't know each other. Moreover, it was a fate that was even more painful than being someone unfamiliar to her, because at the very least, there was no relationship between two people that didn't know each other, so it would naturally not be painful. Why? She couldn't figure it out. Without realizing it, he'd walked along the street and walked out the eastern city gate. The view before his eyes instantly widened, and a vast ocean was reflected in his eyes. Rumble! Rumble! The ocean roiled while shocking waves shot into the sky, causing spindrifts to paint the sky white. The boundless blue ocean rose and fell with great waves, and it rumbled like thunder. It was a grand and magnificent scene that broadened the mind when looked at from afar. When one looked carefully, one could even notice that this vast ocean continued on until the horizon. It traversed the sky and continued deep into the universe, and it actually seemed to be without end. Numerous stars floated within the ocean, and they actually circulated according to various different trajectories. Moreover, it was extremely magnificent to watch them stirring up the ocean water as they moved. Xianxi's eyes couldn't help but light up while the depression accumulated within his heart was suddenly vented, causing his entire body to feel clear and free. This was the God Burial Ocean, an ocean that had buried countless gods, stars, and universes. It lay across the easternmost border of the ancient god domain, and since the ancient times until now, no great power had even subdued it. It was even to the extent that no one dared to declare exactly how vast this ocean was or where its end lay. Xianxi's clothes fluttered as he directly arrived at a precipice before the ocean, and then he sat down cross-legged before looking towards the surging blue ocean in the distance. His mind was completely blank, without any desire, and without any emotion. He'd obtained a form of temporary release. Amidst this sort of state, the river diagram fragments within his sea of consciousness started to circulate silently, and then the diagram of the bloodied damaged sword had appeared once more. The damaged sword was mottled with bloodstains, yet it emanated an oppressive aura of slaughtering the ages and looking down upon the universe. All those years ago, it was precisely through comprehending this diagram that Xianxia had comprehended those three techniques: 5-element annihilator, calm before the storm, and vorpal strike. Moreover, he'd even broke through into the Sword Emperor realm in one go. It could be said that even though this bloody damaged sword seemed to be mottled with blood and in a terrible state that was extremely incomplete, it possessed an immeasurable effect towards the improvement of Xianxi's cultivation in the Sword Dao. At this moment, the diagram of the bloody damaged sword had reappeared while the river diagram fragments awoke from their silence and started circulating silently, and all of this instantly drew Xianxi's attention. He was able to clearly sense that a strand of terror had suddenly arisen in his heart when all of this occurred. It seemed as if something was summoning him from an unknown area extremely deep within the God Burial Ocean. It seemed to be faint and indistinct, yet Xianxia dared to say that it was true and not a misconception. But in merely a moment, when Xianxia intended to get to the bottom of it, this sort of feeling instantly vanished without a trace. Moreover, even the diagram of the bloody damaged sword in his mind had vanished along with the river diagram fragments. This stunned Xianxia, and he muttered, "Looks like the desolate Manka ruins is probably really related to the river diagram fragments." He still remembered that 2 amongst the 9 obscure and ancient characters he distinguished on the river diagram fragments represented the words desolate and ruins. Moreover, the sudden awakening of the river diagram fragments in his sea of consciousness and that trace of a feeling that arose in his heart just now allowed Xianxia to roughly determine that there was definitely some sort of link between all of this. When he thought up to here, he suddenly aroused a wisp of anticipation towards heading into the desolate Manka ruins. He wanted to see exactly what existed there to actually cause such a change in the river diagram fragments. When the veil of night descended, she finally stood up and returned to Heaven Origin Pavilion. I was really worried that you would be unable to get up again after suffering such an unexpected event. Yunqing heaved a sigh of relief when he saw Xianxia return. Xianxia smiled yet didn't say anything. He wasn't so weak and useless. Even though he still hadn't moved on completely from Zhen Liuqing's cold and indifferent attitude towards him. Stay and rest in this abode for the next period of time, and you can take action once the God Burial Ocean enters into its dormant period. Yunqing instructed. Xianxia nodded. However, right when he intended to leave, Yunqing seemed to have thought of something, and he stopped Xianxia and said with a serious expression, "Young Master Xianxia, if conflict arises between you and Gongye Zhifu after you enter the desolate Manka ruins, and you can't avoid fighting that young Mississippi, then what would you do?" Xianxia's eyes suddenly narrowed, and he went silent for a long time before he said, "Don't worry, I'll definitely do my best to complete what I promised to do." As soon as he finished speaking, he left and returned to the abode he'd booked. "I hope so." Yunqing suddenly sighed in his heart as he watched Xianxia leave. He wasn't worried that Xianxia would back out because of this, and he was worried instead about what Xianxia would do if Gongye Zhifu utilized Zhen Liuqing as a hostage to threaten Xianxia in battle. From this day onwards, Xianxia entered into closed-door cultivation within his abode and didn't make another appearance. Along with the passage of time, Phoenix Perch City became more and more bustling, and there were more cultivators arriving from all over practically every single day. Even though most of them weren't spirit god exalts, they were peak existences in the various regions in the ancient god domain. This was extremely normal. The desolate Manka ruins was vast and mysterious. Countless fortuitous encounters were hidden within it, and it wasn't just the 9th grade emperor rank ancestral Dao root alone that resided there. So, even if they knew they were utterly unable to compete with those spirit god exalts from the imperial region, all of the other cultivators had still come over resolutely because of this. On the day before the god burial ocean entered into its dormant period, Xianxia woke up from his meditation, and then he took a deep breath before he walked out of the abode. Today was that Yunqing and Xianxia had set to meet because the god burial ocean would enter into its dormant period tonight, and it would obviously be too late if they only departed tomorrow. Yunqing was already waiting since a long time ago. When he saw Xianxia emerge, he immediately led Xianxia out of the Heaven Origin Pavilion and headed towards the God Burial Ocean. Swoosh! 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 Numerous figures tore through space and teleported. They were like a dense expanse of light droplets that rained swiftly towards the same direction. Xianxia noticed to his surprise that the atmosphere within Phoenix Perch City today seemed exceptionally bustling, and at the same time, it felt as if a storm was coming. Obviously, all the cultivators understood that after the God Burial Ocean entered into its dormant period, the true competition between them would begin. At that time, no matter if it was for the sake of the 9th grade emperor rank ancestral Dao root or for the sake of the other fortuitous encounters within the desolate Manka ruins, numerous brutal battles and slaughters would definitely arise. Yunqing and Xianxia weren't in a rush, and they moved at a neither fast nor slow pace. I've been constantly collecting information in these past few days, and I can confirm that there are a total of 16 spirit god exalts entering the desolate Manka ruins this time. As of now, Gongye Zhifu is the only participant from amongst the top 10. Yunqing quickly described the information he'd collected in these past few days. However, this is merely the spirit god exalts that showed themselves, and it's impossible to confirm exactly how many spirit god exalts are luring in the shadows. Xianxia silently committed all of this to memory, and he didn't say anything. However, the strange thing is that according to the information obtained by the Empress, 2 more peerless geniuses that are even more formidable than Gongye Zhifu will be entering the desolate Manka ruins. But there still isn't any news about them at all. Yunqing pondered deeply for a long time. But no matter what, you have to remember that the competition this time will definitely be brutal, so you have to be careful. Xianxia asked instead, "Who are those 2 fellows that re more formidable than Gongye Zhifu?" "One of them is the young patriarch of the Luo tribe, Luo Xiaonong, and the other is the holy one of the Buddhist sect, Jianan. Both of them are respectively at the 3rd and 7th position on the Domain Enlightened chart, and their strengths are unfathomable. They're extraordinary geniuses that enjoy a far-famed reputation in the imperial region." When he spoke about these 2 people, Yun Qing sighed with emotion, and his voice carried a wisp of shock and admiration. Chen she didn't care who Luo Xiaonong was, and he was curious about Jianan instead because Jianan caused him to be unable to help but think of Zhenlu, who Chen she knew in the 3 dimensions. Looks like the Buddha dimension's forces can't be underestimated in the ancient god domain as well. Chen she seemed to be lost in thought, and it was even to the extent that he thought. Since the Buddha dimension has its own forces in the ancient god domain, then what about the Phoenix clan and Dragon dimension? Do they have their own forces as well? If I have the chance, I must make a trip to the Imperial region. That's the true central area of the ancient god domain, and only by heading there might I be able to find what I want. Chen she decided in his heart. Without him realizing it, they'd already walked out of the city, and the boundless god burial ocean that stretched towards the depths of the universe was ahead. However, unlike what Chen she saw that day, the originally surging god burial ocean was already gradually calming down now. It was like a ferocious beast that was about to fall into hibernation. When looked at from afar, the blue ocean was boundless, and it surged with small ripples. It was like a clear mirror that reflected the scene in the heavens, and even the stars that floated in the ocean water had stopped circulation. All of this displayed that this ocean, which caused the expressions of others to change just from mentioning it, was on the verge of falling completely into a dormant state. At this moment, countless figures were already standing at the banks of the ocean since a long time ago. They formed a dense mass that put them at a number of at least over 1,000 when counted roughly. Moreover, practically all of their cultivations were at the domain enlightened spirit god realm at least, and there was even no lack of universe enlightened ancestral gods. However, those universe enlightened ancestral god realm experts were obviously lackeys, and they walked before domain enlightened spirit god after domain enlightened spirit god while playing the role of guard. They were just like Yun Qing, who stood by Chen Shi's side. Yun Qing said in a deep voice from the side, "You don't have to worry about those universe-enlightened ancestral god realm experts. Even though the god burial ocean has fallen to a dormant state now, it's even more terrifying than it was before this to experts with cultivations above the domain enlightened spirit god realm. Because once they step foot into the ocean, their cultivations will suffer a form of absolute suppression, and it would be difficult for them to do anything. Absolute suppression of their cultivation." It was the first time Chen she had heard about something like this, and he couldn't help but ask curiously. So, in this way, the higher one's cultivation was, the greater the suppression one suffered would be? Yun Qing nodded. Exactly. Do you know why this ocean is called the God Burial Ocean? Because there has been no lack of extraordinary figures that have come here throughout the annals of time with the intention of overcoming this restriction with their own strength. Yet they perished in the end. Chen she was horrified. Only now did he understand the meaning of the name God Burial Ocean. Possessing a cultivation below the domain enlightened spirit god realm won't work as well because even if one is able to step foot into the ocean, one wouldn't be able to resist its dangers. So, only domain enlightened spirit god realm experts are able to arrive safely at the desolate Manka ruins. As he spoke, a wave of clamorous noise suddenly resounded from afar. After that, a violet phoenix that was enveloped by violet flames tore through the sky, and it fluttered down from afar. The wings of the violet phoenix were like drooping clouds that covered the heavens and the earth. It seemed gorgeous and noble, and its entire body was suffused by violet-colored divine flames that caused space to be dyed violet. A handsome young man with violet pupils and silver hair stood proudly on the back of the violet phoenix. His clothes fluttered while his entire body emanated an oppressive and sharp aura, and he was exactly the peerless genius of the imperial region's Gongye clan, Gongye Zhifu. Zhenlu Qing, who wore a black dress, had a clear and pretty appearance, and revealed a composed and tranquil bearing stood by Gongye Zhifu's side, and this caused Gongye Zhifu to seem even more noble and extraordinary. When they noticed these two people arriving on the violet phoenix, all the others in the surroundings couldn't help but feel astounded, and they felt shocked, envious, and a form of heavy pressure. After all, amongst all the spirit god exalts that had arrived now, Gongye Zhifu was definitely the strongest, so it was impossible for them to not feel pressured when facing him. On the other hand, at the instant Chen she saw Zhenlu Qing, a wisp of a sour feeling couldn't help but arise in his heart. After that, He moved his gaze away and refused to look over any longer. Sometimes, it was utterly impossible to completely abandon one's feelings. Yun Qing noticed all of this, and he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He was truly slightly worried about how Chen Shi would face a situation where Gongye Zhifu utilized Jin Lu Qing to threaten Chen Shi in a battle. After he arrived on the Violet Phoenix, it was unknown whether it was intentional or not, but Gongye Zhifu had directly led Jin Lu Qing towards the area Chen Shi stood at. This caused Yun Qing to be unable to help but frown, and he faintly felt that this fellow had probably done this intentionally. The facts proved that Yun Qing wasn't wrong, because in the next moment, Gongye Zhifu wrapped his arm around Zhang Liuqing's waist and strode over towards Chen Shi. Jin Lu Qing had obviously noticed Chen Shi, causing her ink-black brows to knit together, while she seemed to refuse to head in Chen Shi's direction. However, she seemed to be incapable of resistance, and she was brought over by Gongye Zhifu. This caused her brows to knit together even more tightly, and then she glanced at Gongye Zhifu yet didn't say anything in the end. The people in the vicinity were clearly slightly puzzled, and they successively opened up a path for Gongye Zhifu. This caused it to be impossible for Chen Shi to not notice all of this. He turned around and noticed Gongye Zhifu and Jin Lu Qing were approaching, and then a wisp of a piercingly cold expression suddenly flashed in the depths of his eyes. What's this fellow trying to do? Is he coming over here intentionally to humiliate me? However, Gongye Zhifu suddenly stopped moving when they were 3 meters away from Chen Shi, and then he grinned to Chen Shi before starting to chat with Jin Lu Qing. They chatted happily as if there was no one else in the surroundings. Moreover, he even frequently patted Jin Lu Qing on the shoulder in an intimate manner, causing him to feel rather affectionate. That bastard really did it on purpose. Chen Shi watched all of this with a cold and indifferent expression. The most painful thing to him was that from the beginning until the end, Jin Lu Qing actually didn't reveal even a trace of displeasure, and it was entirely impossible to discern exactly what she was thinking. Do you want to move somewhere else? Yun Qing glanced at Chen Shi with slight worry. Chen Shi shook his head, and then he suddenly grinned and said, "There's no need. Let me see how long he can keep this up." His smile was brilliant, yet it didn't contain any fluctuations of emotion at all. It caused Yun Qing's heart to suddenly jerk, and he knew that Gongye Zhifu's actions had utterly infuriated Chen Shi. Right at this moment, an extremely resounding and clear cry resounded. It surged through the heavens and the earth, and it caused the souls of everyone to tremble. This clear cry was too resounding, and it seemed to carry some sort of charm and was filled with a wild and arrogant aura. The clamorous atmosphere in the surroundings suddenly went silent at this moment, and even Gongye Zhifu was shocked, causing him to suddenly raise his eyes towards the distance. Under the gazes of everyone present, 8 beautiful and graceful young women dressed in silk and satin held a gorgeous palanquin up as they flashed over swiftly from afar. A young man lay within the gorgeous palanquin. He had a lazy bearing. His long hair hung loosely on his shoulders, and the clothes before his chest were wide open. His angular face was handsome to the extreme, and he carried a wisp of a seemingly evil aura. Moreover, he had a wine jug in his hand and was drinking from it. Besides that, a divine beast, vermilion bird, that was extremely gorgeous and extraordinary stood on his shoulder, and that clear cry from before had obviously come from it. Luo Xiaonong from the Imperial Region's Luo clan, someone exclaimed with shock, and then an uproar erupted in the surroundings. Everyone revealed a wisp of disbelief, and they seemed to have never expected that he would actually come here. Luo Xiaonong, an existence that was ranked at the 3rd position on the Domain Enlightened chart. This meant that amongst all the Domain Enlightened spirit gods within the 1,000+ regions and countless universes in the ancient god domain, then besides when compared against the mere 2 people that were ranked above him, he could be said to be invincible. This fellow is surprising as always. Gongye Zhifu's violet pupils flowed with cold bolts of lightning. At this moment, even Chen Shi couldn't help but glance over, and his heart shook. He acutely noticed that Luo Xiaonong's aura was so formidable that he'd almost never seen someone with such a formidable aura, and it caused even Chen Shi to feel a trace of pressure. This caused Chen Shi to sigh with emotion. There really are a bunch of freaks in the world. When compared to him, that Sun Yongping is simply nothing worth mentioning. Isn't that the Buddhist sect's Jianan? Suddenly, someone exclaimed with surprise. It was like a stone that caused 1,000 ripples on the surface of a lake. Everyone noticed to their astonishment that a monk was suddenly standing at a spot extremely far away. He wore a moon-white monk's robe made of rough cloth, and he wore straw sandals while holding a cane made out of withered wood. He had an ordinary expression that wasn't conspicuous at all, and only his bearing was tranquil like a calm well or rock on a precipice, towering and steady. If one didn't look carefully, it was extremely easy to overlook him. Compared to how Luo Xiaonong made an appearance, Jianan simply kept an extremely low profile, and he was only noticed at this moment. However, no one dared to look down upon him because he was an existence that was ranked at the 7th position on the Domain Enlightened chart. He was an entire 2 ranks higher than Gongye Zhifu. In an instant, everyone in the surroundings recognized these peerless geniuses of legend, and they instantly stole the limelight away from Gongye Zhifu, causing the gazes of everyone to move towards them. It wasn't that they looked down upon Gongye Zhifu, and it was instead because they'd never imagined that these 2 geniuses would actually arrive here at this moment. Looks like the information Empress Yu Che obtained wasn't wrong, and Luo Xiaonong and Jianan have already arrived successively. Chun Shi's reaction seemed to be much calmer. He didn't really care much about the 9th grade Emperor rank ancestral Dao route when he came here this time, and coupled with the incident between him and Jin Luqing, his thoughts had been completely moved on to Gongye Zhifu. So, all of his thoughts revolved around how he should stop Gongye Zhifu. The sky was gradually darkening, and when the veil of sky enveloped down completely and covered the sky, the god-burial ocean in the distance finally fell into a dormant state. It was deathly silent without wind or waves, and it was even to the extent that there wasn't even a trace of a ripple. It was suffused with a strange silence, and it was mysterious and horrifying. However, this scene caused the spirits of all the cultivators here to be refreshed, and they grew restless. We can finally take action. Quickly move out. If we're a step too late, then there probably won't even be any scraps left. Let's go. Amidst a wave of clamorous noise, numerous multicolored streaks tore through space and illuminated the sky, and they whistled through space as they charged towards the depths of the god-burial ocean. For a time, this entire expanse of the heavens and the earth was filled by multicolored streaks while countless cultivators departed, and they covered the heavens and the earth. It was a rather magnificent scene. However, even though they were swift, they couldn't compare to Luo Xiaonong, Jianan, and Gongye Zhifu. The 3 of them had practically set out at the first possible moment, and they vanished above the boundless ocean in an instant. You must be careful. The desolate Manka ruins is extremely dangerous, and it's completely different from the ancient god domain. If you encounter any danger, then you must remember to prioritize your safety. Yun Qing instructed once more with a solemn expression. Chun Shi nodded to display his understanding. Go on. I'll wait here for your return. Take care of yourself, said Yun Qing. Swoosh! Chun Shi cupped his hands, and then his figure flashed and immediately tore through the sky towards the god-burial ocean in the distance. In merely an instant, he vanished without a trace. Since the ancient times, heroes have become prisoners of love. Little fellow, you must not allow yourself to tumble because of her. Yun Qing watched Chun Shi's figure vanish, and he couldn't help but mutter to himself. Beneath the veil of night, the god-burial ocean was like a deathly silent and gloomy mirror that seemed extremely mysterious. One could frequently see strands of bright light charging out from the surface of the ocean before illuminating the night sky. It was the starlight emanated by the numerous stars that remained beneath the surface of the ocean, and they revealed a form of gorgeous and lucent beauty while being immersed beneath the ocean water. The god-burial ocean was extremely large and seemingly boundless. After teleporting for 10 minutes of time, it was very hard for Chun Shi to see a single figure in his vicinity, and it felt as if only he remained here. This was extremely common. Once they entered the god-burial ocean, it meant that the competition between them had already begun. So, unless it was people with good relationships, otherwise no one would be willing to casually form a group with another. Chun Shi was naturally no exception. As expected, The heaven Tao laws here have obviously become much thinner, and the heavens and the earth carry a strand of a seemingly chaotic and desolate energy. Perhaps it's precisely because of this energy that expert at the universe enlightened ancestral god realm and above don't dare to step foot into this ocean. Xianxia investigated the surroundings as he teleported, and he acutely noticed that everything within the god burial ocean really was quite different from the ancient god domain. The reason for this was that seemingly chaotic and desolate energy. It was thick, mysterious, and everywhere. It enveloped every single inch of the god burial ocean. The expanse of the heavens and the earth that the god burial ocean covered was filled with a desolate and chaotic aura that was entirely different to the ancient god domain. This energy was everywhere, yet it was utterly impossible to absorb. It was like the energy that fueled the circulation of the heaven Tao, and it was indistinct and impossible to capture. This caused Xianxia to be shocked in his heart. He realized that once he entered the god burial ocean, he'd already left the scope of the ancient god domain, and he couldn't approach the situation before him in the same way as he had in the past. He became even more careful, and he even slowed down his speed of teleportation. Just like this, the time for an entire incense stick to burn had passed, and right when Xianxia thought that he'd made a big deal about nothing, a shrill and miserable cry suddenly resounded from far away. Moreover, it seemed to be extremely terrifying while amidst this extremely terrifying night. A wisp of cold lightning flashed within Xianxia's eyes, and his gaze swiftly swept over. Yet he noticed that the expanse of ocean in the distance was suffused with the blood of gods, causing the ocean to be dyed red with blood, and there was an enormous shadow that swiftly vanished beneath the ocean water. Xianxia frowned when he witnessed this, and he thought to himself, could it be that numerous terrifying and unknown living beings are hiding beneath the god burial ocean? It was impossible for him to have made a mistake. Someone had obviously lost his or her life here and was killed by that enormous shadow at the bottom of the ocean. However, unfortunately, that shadow had already vanished when Xianxia glanced over. Looks like this god burial ocean isn't safe. Xianxia took a deep breath while he casually withdrew the talisman armament, and he became even more attentive. He continued forward and didn't encounter any danger all along the way, but shrill and miserable cries frequently resounded from the surroundings, and it caused the atmosphere beneath the boundless veil of night to become even more ghastly and terrifying. Xianxia's expression became extremely vigilant as well. He didn't wish for any mishaps to occur before he could even arrive at the desolate Manka ruins. Swish! After a long time, the sound of space being tore apart resounded in the sky. An enormous flying beast with a wingspan of 300 m soared through the sky, and it caused a gale to arise and ocean water to surge into enormous waves in its wake. In an instant, it flashed past from above Xianxia. Some figures were standing atop the back of that flying beast, and all of them revealed slightly strange expressions when they noticed Xianxia was traveling on his own. Isn't that the fellow who tried to flirt with Gongye Zhifu's female companion in Heaven Origin Pavilion? Haha! It really is that frog that wanted to taste the flesh of a swan. I never expected that he would actually come here as well, and he'd even all alone. Could it be that he isn't afraid that others would rob and kill him? Obviously, idiots like these are usually extremely audacious. The flying beast circled in the sky, and it wasn't in a hurry to leave. Xianxia raised his head, and his eyes narrowed as he gazed at these cultivators. Suddenly, he started laughing. Being ridiculed at the Heaven Origin Pavilion that day was something he couldn't do anything about because there were too many people there after all, and it would be extremely troublesome if some sort of trouble arose because of it. But now, only experts at the domain enlightened spirit god realm could step foot into the god burial ocean, and it was so vast. Moreover, it was at the heat of night when it was the best to kill, so Xianxia would naturally not allow himself to suffer injustice. Otherwise, he would truly be too useless and cowardly. Swoosh! Xianxia casually slashes with his sword, and a wisp of brilliant sword chi tore through the sky. It was mysterious, extraordinary, and impossible to guard against. Those cultivators were ridiculing Xianxia when their figures staggered, and they almost fell of the back of the flying beast. After that, they noticed to their shock that the wings of the flying beast beneath them had been slashes off, causing its feathers to rain down along with streams of blood while it let out a sharp and sorrowful cry. Bastard! That fellow actually dared to launch a surprise attack against us. Damn it! He actually injured my jade-eyed snow eagle. I'll make you pay with your life. The faces of those cultivators sank while they exploded with rage. They leaped down from the sky and withdrew various divine artifacts as they charged fiercely at Xianxia. Xianxia didn't even spare a glance at them before he slashed once more. It was a vast and powerful strand of sword chi that seemed to possess unparalleled might like a torrent of stars. The calm before the storm. Rumble. In merely an instant, the strand of sword chi crushed and blasted apart all of their attacks as if it was crushing through dry leaves, and it seemed to be all-powerful. This group of cultivators were extremely strong, and they were top-rate geniuses in the domain enlightened spirit god realm. Unfortunately, they'd encountered Xianxia, and they weren't a match for him at all because the gap between them was too huge. Even the 13th son of imperial monarch Gochun, Sun Yongping, who possessed the potential of a spirit god exalt, had been easily beaten up by Xianxia, let alone them. Who exactly are you? All of them were extremely shocked because merely this strike alone allowed them to realize how extraordinary Xianxia was, and he was completely superior to them in strength. In the next moment, they weren't able to speak any longer because Xianxia's strand of sword chi shook them to the point of coughing up blood. It was like they'd been struck by a myriad of large mountains, causing their entire bodies to be blasted flying, and then thumps resounded as they fell like dumplings into the god burial ocean. Xianxia didn't feel any pity at all towards such people, and he felt that he should let them understand how misfortune comes from the mouth. However, Xianxia didn't strike a lethal blow, as he felt that teaching them a lesson was sufficient. He wasn't narrow-minded to the point of annihilating them because they ridiculed him. Roar! But to Xianxia's surprise, even though he didn't strike a lethal blow against them, an enormous beast suddenly leaped up from beneath the surface of the ocean, and it actually opened its mouth and swallowed all of them into its stomach. This ferocious beast was shaped like a kuei ox, yet it had a pair of blood-red pupils and a pair of dragon horns. Moreover, its entire body was covered in pitch-black scales that were suffused with an icy cold and metallic glow. Ah! A wave of shrill cries resounded from within the ferocious beast's mouth, but they stopped abruptly in no time. Obviously, they'd perished within the beast's belly. Xianxia didn't feel any pity towards this at all, and he was merely slightly surprised and became slightly vigilant as well. Never had he expected that it would actually be so dangerous beneath the surface of the ocean. Swish! The ferocious beast's blood-red pupils swept towards Xianxia before its figure flashed, and it shot beneath the surface of the water. Obviously, it wasn't willing to fight Xianxia above the ocean. Looks like the intelligence of these ferocious beasts is obviously extremely high, and it already knows when to fight and when to retreat. Xianxia's sharp brows raised while he had a stronger feeling that this ocean was unusual. All of those cultivators were top-rate domain enlightened spirit gods, so even if they were injured, it hadn't injured their quintessence. However, they'd been swallowed by that ferocious beast in one go, and this obviously showed how formidable the ferocious beast's strength was. God Burial Ocean. God Burial Ocean. No wonder it was given such a name. Xianxia pondered and sighed in his heart, and then his figure flashed as he flew up higher into the sky to pull apart the distance between himself and the ocean's surface. Not long after that, and after he traveled for around 500,000 kilometers, Xianxia felt a bone-piercingly cold aura while the air in the surroundings was faintly suffused with the smell of blood. Xianxia's eyes instantly narrowed. He noticed to his shock that the surface of the sea extremely far in the distance had been frozen into a layer of ice. It was of unknown thickness, and it covered an area of a few tens of thousands of kilometers. There were some corpses, beast bones, and fragments of divine artifacts piled up on the ice. Moreover, there was a large number of severed limbs frozen within the ice, causing it to seem extremely strange. This was probably created by a supreme technique of the ice element, and this person's grasp of the divine Tao of water has obviously attained initial stage. Xianxia swiftly deduced in his heart, and he faintly felt that this person's strength was absolutely not inferior to his own. Rumble! Suddenly, A wave of intense rumbling resounded from beneath the layer of ice, and then it rumbled as it shattered into pieces. After that, an enormous figure that was completely bright golden charged out from beneath it. It was a ferocious beast that was over 3 kilometers long, extremely thick and large, seemed like a dragon yet wasn't a dragon, seemed like a python yet wasn't a python, and had 4 scaled claws at its stomach. As soon as it charged out, it opened its bloody mouth and suddenly sucked, causing the severed limbs, corpses, and everything else in and on the layer of shattered ice to be swallowed into its mouth. This seems like a trap? Xianxia's eyes narrowed as his figure suddenly flashed, and he dodged towards the distance. Swoosh! At practically the exact same moment, a wisp of cold light suddenly shot out violently from the space in the distance, and it transformed into an ice crescent that slashed down. Pooh! It practically didn't encounter any obstruction before the head of that terrifying ferocious beast was severed, and its enormous figure shook violently as blood sprayed out like a waterfall from it. After that, a green-robed young man who had a narrow and long face flashed into appearance. He withdrew a jade bottle and pointed its opening at the ferocious beast's corpse. Swish! He actually took its entire corpse and placed it within the jade bottle. Not bad, with this 4-clawed Pithragon's corpse as bait. It would be sufficient for me to draw the attention of an ancestral root spirit worm after I enter the desolate Manka ruins. The green-robed young man smiled lightly as he placed the jade bottle away carefully, and then his gaze suddenly swept over like a bolt of lightning towards the spot Xianxia was hiding. After that, a wisp of a grin curled up onto the corners of his mouth, and he said, "Fellow Taoist, since we've met, then why hide yourself? I Kun Wuxia am no villain. Could it be that you think I'd eat you? Perhaps you wouldn't eat anyone, but you'd definitely trap everyone." Xianxia's tall figure flashed into appearance amidst his indifferent voice. At the same time, Xianxia was shocked in his heart. Kun Wuxia? Isn't that the spirit gold exalt that's ranked at the 19th position on the Domain Enlightened chart? Oh? What do you mean by that? Kun Wuxia grinned as he spoke. For the sake of drawing that beast out, you killed 3 Domain Enlightened spirit gods and froze their corpse in ice. Such ruthless methods aren't something that can simply be described as trapping others. Xianxia spoke indifferently. Ha ha ha. It was just a few pieces of trash. It should be their honor to be able to be used by me, Kun Wuxia. Not only was Kun Wuxia not infuriated from being exposed, he started roaring with laughter instead, and his utterly indifferent appearance caused Xianxia to be unable to help but frown. Obviously, Kun Wuxia was bloodthirsty by nature, and this wasn't the first time he'd done something like this. I'm just curious. If it was merely for the sake of hunting some ferocious beast, then with your status, why did you have to utilize such despicable methods? Xianxia's brows raised as he spoke. Oh, looks like fellow Taoist isn't clearly aware of the situation. The ferocious beasts in this ocean are extremely difficult to hunt. Unless one utilizes the blood and flesh of experts at the God-rank realm as bait, otherwise, they wouldn't show themselves at all. Kun Wuxia said slowly, "In this way, I could only utilize such a strategy. Otherwise, how could I possibly be willing to dirty my hands with those pieces of trash?" When he spoke up to hear, a wisp of an unfathomable expression suddenly arose in his eyes, and he stared at Xianxia as he said, "If I were to choose an opponent, then I would definitely choose someone like fellow Taoist, and not those pieces of trash." A wisp of vigilance instantly arose in Xianxia's heart, yet he smiled and said, "It just so happens that after I witnessed all of that, I was feeling of seeking guidance from fellow Taoist as well." Kun Wuxia's eyes narrowed. He stared at Xianxia for a long time before he suddenly started laughing, and then he actually flicked his sleeve and left. "I can't see through you, so it's better to not make a move against you. Moreover, even if I'm going to make a move against you, it wouldn't be too late to do so after we enter the desolate Manka ruins. But it's absolutely not now." His figure tore through space and left swiftly amidst his roaring laughter. This fellow isn't as arrogant and conceited as he seems to be on the surface. Xianxia frowned as he watched Kun Wuxia leave, and he didn't dare look down upon these disciples from the ancient clans in the imperial region. Actually, it was obvious because how could someone capable of possessing the potential of a spirit god exalt and ascending into the domain enlightened chart be an idiot? She didn't waste any more time, and he continued teleporting forward. According to the guidance he received from Empress Wuxia, he would definitely be able to find the entrance of the desolate Mancha ruins so long as he continuously teleported into the depths of the god burial ocean. She didn't doubt this at all because all along the way, he'd noticed that the other cultivators were acting just like this, and they were teleporting all along the way towards a fixed direction. In the blink of an eye, a few days had already passed. During these days, she had practically spent all his time on traveling. Because he possessed the divine dark parasol tree, he didn't have to spend any time at all to recover his strength, and he could teleport continuously. Just like this, he'd actually surpassed numerous cultivators that had set out before him, and later on, he didn't even see another figure for a very long time. However, she was very clearly aware that even up until now, he still hadn't surpassed Luo Xiaonong, Jianan, and Gong Yezhifu. So, it was impossible for him to arouse any sense of pride in his heart. During these few days of time, she had noticed that many cultivators were searching for all sorts of opportunities to hunt the ferocious beasts within the ocean just like Kun Wuqing had done. Of course, there was no lack some battles that erupted between cultivators. This caused Shi to be unable to help but feel slightly curious. Could it be that hunting the ferocious beasts within this ocean will be helpful towards their exploration of the desolate Mancha ruins later? While holding the intention to give it a try, she had hunted and killed a few ferocious beasts all along the way. However, he didn't act like Kun Wuqing and utilize the corpses of other cultivators as bait, and he directly utilized himself as bait instead. He allowed a trace of his blood to flow out in order to draw the ferocious beasts over, and he was able to succeed around 2 out of 10 times. After that, he gathered the corpses of those ferocious beasts for when a need for them may arise in the future. Bang! On this day, while she was moving through the sky above the ocean, he'd utilized the same method to lure out a ferocious beast with an extremely strange appearance. It had 3 legs, a backbone covered in dark green spikes, and its head seemed like the head of a cow. It charged out of the ocean, and then the spikes on its entire body suddenly swept out like numerous spears that shot violently at Shi. Clang! Shi held the talisman armament in hand, and he slashed in a relaxed manner. Swish! However, right when Shi launched his attack, a snow-white torrent tore through the sky and transformed into a crescent that slashed down. Pooh! Pooh! Shi's sword strike and that crescent struck the ferocious beast at practically the exact same moment, causing its figure to be forcefully slashes into 3. Blood sprayed into the air as it perished miserably on the spot. Shi's eyes narrowed slightly when he saw this, and he didn't start to clean up the battlefield impatiently but glanced towards the side instead. I never expected that we would meet again, fellow Taoist. What a coincidence. A figure appeared in the space over there, and it was a green-robed young man with a narrow and long face. It was exactly Kun Wuqing. In my opinion, your arrival isn't very coincidental. Shi spoke indifferently because he didn't feel that they'd met coincidentally. Haha. Don't misunderstand, fellow Taoist. I just couldn't restrain myself from desiring to cooperate with you when I noticed how extraordinary your strength was. Kun Wuqing grinned and said, with our abilities, if we work together, we wouldn't have to fear anyone once we enter the desolate Manchu ruins. Moreover, when the time comes to seize the 9th grade Emperor rank ancestral Tao root, it would be as easy as blowing off dust for the 2 of us. What do you think, fellow Taoist? When he spoke up to hear, he slapped himself on the forehead and he said with a smile, of course, for the sake of displaying my sincerity, I, Kun Wuqing, swear to the heavens that I'll absolutely not deceive or scheme against my partner. If it was any other cultivator, that person would surely be tempted by such an invitation. After all, this fellow had sworn and promised such great prospects. Coupled with the fact that he was in existence ranked in the top 20 of the domain enlightened chart, it was impossible for others to not be tempted. However, she didn't even give it any thought before he refused. Sorry, I'm used to acting alone. I appreciate fellow Taoists' good intentions. He was very clearly aware that even though it sounded like a very good proposition, Kun Wuqing would definitely not hesitate to kill him and take everything in the end. Cooperating with Kun Wuqing was no different than providing support to a villain, and it was extremely unwise. Kun Wuqing frowned and said seriously, "Fellow Taoist, will you not reconsider? According to my knowledge, many spirit god exalts already have their own companions now, and they've started to work together. Under such circumstances, your chances of obtaining any benefits in the desolate Manka ruins would be extremely tiny." Xianxia smiled and said, "Thank you for your invitation, fellow Taoist. I've already made up my mind." Kun Wuqing's face sank, and he seemed to be slightly displeased. However, he suddenly started laughing, and he nodded and said, "Good, very good. Everyone has their own way of thinking, so I won't force you. I hope fellow Taoist has a favorable and triumphant journey. Farewell." As soon as he finished speaking, he glanced deeply at Xianxia before his figure whistled off into the distance. That fellow intended to cooperate with me for no rhyme or reason. He was obviously carrying ill intent. Xianxia watched Kun Wuqing leave while a wisp of a cold arc appeared on the corners of his mouth. After that, he frowned as he realized a problem. If it was really as Kun Wuqing had said, and those spirit god exalts had formed alliances amongst themselves, then the situation would be slightly severe. With Gongye Zhifu's prestige and status, he would probably be able to easily draw over some spirit god exalts to his side. Under such circumstances, it would obviously be even more difficult for Xianxia to stop Gongye Zhifu from seizing the ancestral Tao root. Could it be that I really have to find others to work together with first? Xianxia pondered deeply for a long time, yet he shook his head in the end. He stopped thinking about it, and he intended to enter the desolate Manka ruins first before taking action according to the circumstances. After that, Xianxia gathered the corpse of that ferocious beast from before, and then he continued flying forward. He didn't encounter any more disturbances in his journey. Just like this, he continued forward for an entire 7 days of time. Right when Xianxia felt that he'd almost traversed the distance of over 100 universes, his pupils suddenly constricted as he stopped moving in midair. In the sky above the ocean extremely far into the distance, an extremely enormous door had floated up into appearance within his field of vision. It stood towering in the sky, and it was extremely vast and magnificent. This door was unbelievable. It was like a black hole opened in the universe, and it seemed capable of swallowing the world. She could clearly see numerous stars being pushed by the ocean water, and they surged into the door along with the waves before vanishing in an instant. Those were stars. A myriad of living beings could reside on them, yet they were like the marbles in the hand of a child when compared to the door. On the other hand, when Xianxia stood before it, he was simply like an ant that stood before the door to the heavens. He was so tiny and insignificant, like a mere ant. In practically an instant, Xianxia determined that it was the entrance of the desolate Manka ruins. The reality of it was indeed so. Right at this moment, Xianxia noticed to his shock that numerous black dots were standing above the ocean before the door. Shockingly, it was numerous cultivators. They were ceaselessly approaching the door and transformed into numerous streaks that flashed towards the door, and then they quickly vanished without a trace. Xianxia stood on the spot and stared for a long time. He only took action when most of those figures had vanished. As he grew closer and closer to the towering door, an extremely thick, chaotic, and desolate aura assaulted him. It pressured Xianxia to the point his expression changed slightly and breathing became slightly difficult for him as well. He hurriedly circulated his entire cultivation in order to deal with this pressure. However, it was precisely this that allowed him to have a deeper understanding of how mere world-enlightened true gods were absolutely unable to approach that door. When he arrived before the door, Xianxia's expression was already extremely solemn. The chaotic and desolate aura was too dense and seemed material. It ceaselessly sprayed out from the depths of the door, causing even his teleportation to become sluggish while his movement speed slowed down. The desolate Manku ruins. Looks like the Heaven Tao laws within it is probably formed from this aura. I wonder what sort of dangers I'll encounter after entering it. Xianxia took a deep breath while a wisp of a resolute expression flashed in his eyes, and then he charged towards the door. To his surprise, right at the instant he passed through the door, a strand of an irresistible and terrifying suction force suddenly enveloped his entire body. In the next moment, his vision turned black, and his figure was dragged uncontrollably into the depths of the door. The sky was vast, and the mountains were luxuriant. The heavens and the earth surged with a desolate aura, and it felt as if he'd instantly returned to the primeval times or returned to the prehistoric time when the world had just been created after the chaos was split apart. Everything was filled with a primitive aura. There were no signs of human habitation here. Not were there any cities or buildings, and there were only boundless mountains, lakes, and ancient forests. Xianxia stood before a mountain, and he noticed all of this, causing his expression to reveal a wisp of surprise. This is the desolate Manchu ruins? In his previous expectations, he thought that this was an expanse of desolation, and it would be covered in abandoned and desolate ruins. Never had he expected that it would be a place like this. Suddenly, Xianxia's eyes focused as he noticed to his shock that a divine herb that was suffused with a chaotic glow was growing out from the cracks on the wall of a precipice. It was around 30 centimeters tall, and it had fine and soft flowers and leaves that swayed with the wind. Every single inch of it was branded with the markings of chaos that held the profundities of the Tao, and it emanated strands of dense light. Obviously, it was a rare divine herb of extraordinary quality, and it exceeded Xianxia's imagination because he'd never seen such a herb in the past. Yet right at this instant, Xianxia had actually noticed at least 3 such divine herbs on that precipice. This place really is filled with unbelievable fortuitous encounters. Xianxia couldn't help but exclaim with surprise. He was truly unable to imagine exactly how many divine treasures were hidden within the desolate Manchu ruins. However, right when Xianxia intended to head forward and gather the divine herb, the river diagram fragments within his sea of consciousness actually started circulating silently, and the diagram of the bloodied incomplete sword actually appeared once more. Unlike in the past, the diagram seemed to be extremely clear this time. The bloodstains on the damaged sword were scarlet red and bright, and they seemed as if they were about to drop down. Even more surprising to Xianxia at this moment was that he clearly sensed a strand of terrifying sword insight that was unlike anything he'd sensed from it in the past, and it was filled with a desolate, ancient, and primitive aura. Moreover, this aura even caused his soul to tremble. This strand of sword insight was truly too terrifying. It was powerful like the ages, distant like the heaven Tao, and primitive like the source of the Tao. As soon as it appeared, it caused Xianxia's soul to shiver and feel extremely oppressed. Xianxia's heart couldn't help but tremble. He was a spirit god exalt, and his cultivation in the sword Tao had attained the sword emperor realm. He stood superior above most of his peers, and he was practically able to look down upon them all. Yet now, he actually felt so powerless before this strand of sword insight, and he was like a piece of duckweed floating in the ocean and was extremely tiny. Exactly what sort of height in the sword Tao would allow something to possess such might? Xianxia finally confirmed that an even higher realm in the sword Tao existed above the sword emperor realm, and even more formidable profundities in the sword Tao existed. After all, it was merely a diagram of a damaged, bloodied sword. Yet the strand of sword insight it was branded with was capable of attaining such an astonishing level. Obviously, the owner of that damaged sword had a cultivation in the sword Tao that had attained an inconceivable level. But in next to no time, Xianxia couldn't be bothered to think about it. The river diagram fragment fluctuated ceaselessly, causing the diagram to grow clearer and clearer, and that sword insight grew more and more stronger. Xianxia felt his mind drone and shake while numerous strange and mysterious scenes flashed through his mind, and then suddenly surged into his heart. In the boundless universe that was pitch black and deathly silent, a tall figure stood at the center of the universe, and an iron sword is pierced into the area before his feet. Before Xianxia could see the appearance of that figure clearly, the scene changed abruptly. Numerous figures with monstrous divine might appeared. There was a fiend god that had 3 heads, 6 arms, and held chains of order as he roared through the heavens and the earth and shattered the universe. There was a golden figure of uncountable height that controlled the sun and moon, and his entire bodies emanated a myriad of strands of light that illuminated the universe. There was a Taoist whose body flowed with the Tai Chi diagram of chaos and arrived on a celestial gourd. He resided in the sky as he spoke the profound truth that resounded through the sky. There was a barbaric god with the face of a man and the body of a beast who arrived on a divine serpent. His figure was like a mountain, and his arms were covered in lightning. There was a spirit that rode on a monstrous ocean of blood and possessed supreme wisdom, and it took the form of all things. Numerous magnificent scenes and multiple terrifying figures that possessed boundless divine might appeared. And this scene caused Xianxi's soul to shake, his Tao heart to tremble, and he himself was on the verge of being suffocated. Any one of those figures was inconceivably formidable, and wasn't someone a domain-enlightened spirit god or universe-enlightened ancestral god could compare to. It was even to the extent that their auras were even more formidable than Empress Wuxia. They were like numerous grand overlords that controlled the universe, and they were capable of looking down on the ages. At this instant, even though he was merely witnessing these scenes, the strands of terrifying auras they emanated shook Xianxia to the point his Tao heart almost collapsed. Fortunately, these scenes merely appeared for an instant. Swoosh! In the next moment, the scene changed once more. A strand of sword chi swept through the universe. It was like the river of time, and it slashed down. After that, the fiend god that had 3 heads, 6 arms, and controlled the chains of order was killed. The golden figure of uncountable height that controlled the sun and moon was killed. The Taoist that spoke the profound truth and arrived on a celestial gourd was killed. The barbaric god that possessed the face of a man and the body of a beast. The spirit that possessed supreme wisdom and took the form of all things. All of those figures that possessed monstrous divine might didn't even have the time to react or defend themselves before they were all slaughtered before this sword chi. The universe, space, landscape, order of the heaven Tao. Everything was slashed apart and annihilated by this strand of sword chi. What sort of supreme divine might was this? How peerless was this sword strike? It was beyond imagination. It was like no words in the world could describe its might, because its might was completely beyond all imagination. It was even to the extent that she didn't even have enough time to witness this scene clearly before his entire body seemed as if it had been struck by lightning. He felt a piercing pain from his eyes, and his entire body couldn't help but start shivering. The scene changed once more. It was still that expanse of the universe. It was pitch black and deathly silent. Yet only that figure remained, and the iron sword that remained pierced before his feet. The iron sword was already damaged. Its edge was covered in blood, and it seemed to have gone extremely dim. In my life, I persisted on severing all Taos and slaughtering all enemies, and I finally saw the ultimate path. My path isn't a lonely one. My path isn't a lonely one. Suddenly, that figure roared with laughter. The figure's laughter shook the universe, and it was excited, helpless, sorrowful, and carried a feeling of release. In the end, his figure suddenly collapsed into pieces, and then transformed into specks of light that vanished. Only that damaged iron sword still remained, and it trembled and wailed in the pitch-black and deathly silent universe. Bang! She felt his mind shake, and then he'd awakened completely from those strange scenes. His countenance was already pale while his entire body was drenched by cold sweat, and the space between his brows still carried a wisp of shock that couldn't be eliminated. That figure. Could it be the owner of the damaged sword? What's the ultimate path? He clearly attained victory at the end of that battle, so why did he suddenly vanish in the end? Did he leave? Or did he perish? Numerous questions surged into Xianxi's heart, and it caused him to be stunned for a long time. In the end, he could only roughly confirm that the diagram of the bloody damaged sword which appeared from the river diagram fragments was the iron sword in that figure's hands. He didn't know anything else besides that. Perhaps, in the future, when he attained the height that figure had attained, he would understand all of this. But it absolutely wouldn't be now. After a long time, Xianxia suddenly realized something. Why did the river diagram fragments act unexpectedly like this as soon as I stepped foot into the desolate Mancha ruins? The diagram of the bloody damaged sword, the desolate Mancha ruins, the river diagram fragments. Could it be that there's really some sort of link between them? For no rhyme of reason, Xianxia recalled the obscure ancient characters that represented desolate and ruins, which had appeared on the river diagram fragments. Suddenly, that familiar feeling arose once more in Xianxia's heart, and it seemed like something that was somewhere within the desolate Mancha ruins seemed to be summoning him from afar. The reason it felt familiar was because he'd inadvertently arrived before the God Burial Ocean on the first day that he'd entered Phoenix Perch City, and he'd sensed this same summons that day. However, unlike the last time, even though he was still only able to sense it faintly, it was much clearer than before. It was even to the extent that Xianxia instantly determined that this summon came from the north of the desolate Mancha ruins. However, when he intended to confirm all of this, he noticed that feeling had vanished once more, and it was entirely out of his control. What exactly is going on? Xianxia couldn't help but try to sense the diagram of the bloody damaged sword in his sea of consciousness. Rumble. Right when his consciousness touched the diagram, the latter suddenly glowed, and then the entire diagram abruptly transformed into a wisp of surging energy that surged into Xianxia's consciousness. Countless comprehensions in the sword Dao surged ceaselessly like tidewater, and the impact from this caused Xianxia's mind to be on the verge of exploding. Because these comprehensions were truly too enormous, and it caused even his current strength to seem to be on the verge of being unable to endure it. In next to no time, all of these comprehensions suddenly stopped, and then they transformed into the diagram of an iron sword that was branded within Xianxia's consciousness. It was obviously a form of inheritance, and it contained comprehensions in the sword Dao that were unimaginably enormous. Now, all of it was stored within Xianxia's consciousness. Xianxia was surprised and felt slight disbelief. However, when he utilized his consciousness to sense this inheritance, he noticed that it was actually real, because the desolate, distant, and primitive sword insight within the inheritance was so powerful and dense. Moreover, it even contained extremely enormous experiences and comprehensions, causing Xianxia's mind and heart to almost become immersed within it to the point of being unable to free himself from it. Moreover, when Xianxia sensed the river diagram fragments once more, he noticed that the diagram of the bloody damaged sword had vanished from it. All of this proved that he'd truly obtained the sword Dao inheritance contained within the diagram now. I never expected that I would obtain such a fortuitous encounter as soon as I arrived within the desolate Mancha ruins. Even if I leave right now, it's sufficient for me to leave without any regrets. Xianxia couldn't help but be slightly excited. After he attained the Sword Emperor realm in the Sword Dao, he'd really entered into a sluggish period where his Sword Dao was unable to improve any longer. There were numerous reasons for this, but the most important reason was he lacked knowledge and inheritances related to the realm above the Sword Emperor realm. Now, he'd actually coincidentally obtained the inheritance within the diagram of the bloody damaged sword. So the intensity of the pleasant surprise it gave Xianxia was obvious. After all, just moments ago, he'd personally witnessed those world-shocking scenes, and he'd witnessed the might of that sword strike which couldn't be described with any words. The strength of an inheritance in the Sword Dao that could sever all Daos and annihilate all enemies was obvious. If he didn't have an important task to accomplish and had to stop Gongye Zhifu from succeeding, Xianxia truly wished for nothing more than to enter into closed-door cultivation right now and cultivate properly for a while. Even though I don't possess sufficient time to comprehend it, I can't waste the time I have all along the way, and I'll comprehend as much as I can. Xianxia took a deep breath and pondered deeply for a long time. He was very clearly aware of how formidable his opponent's strength would be this time, and there were more than one of such opponents. Even though Xianxia wasn't afraid, he knew that he didn't possess absolute confidence of being victorious against his opponents. Thus, he intended to make the best use of his time to improve his combat strength as much as he could. Not to mention that since he possessed the inheritance of the Iron Sword, he could comprehend it for practical use and utilize his opponents as his whetstones to temper his own strength. Once he figured out all of this, Xianxia immediately stopped hesitating and took action. Swoosh! His figure flashed and directly arrived at the side of the precipice. He carefully gathered the divine herb that grew in the crack between the rocks, and then he sized it up briefly before putting it away with satisfaction. This divine herb was extraordinary indeed. It contained surging chaotic Tao Qi, and every single inch of its leaves were covered in mysterious markings of the Tao. It surpassed anything he'd seen in the past, and its value was immeasurable. Yet there were actually 3 such divine herbs on the wall of this precipice. This obviously showed how many fortuitous encounters existed in the desolate Mancha ruins, and it was no wonder that it was able to draw over numerous peerless geniuses from the ancient god domain. Even if they gave up on the 9th grade emperor rank ancestral Tao root, merely these divine herbs and divine treasures were sufficient to make all cultivators fight to the death. For example, Xianxia had noticed 3 rare divine herbs right after he arrived at the desolate Mancha ruins. This wasn't merely because of luck, and the crux was that the desolate Mancha ruins was filled with unimaginable fortune. Swoosh! Xianxia's figure flashed once more, and he casually gathered the 2nd divine herb. However, right when he intended to gather the last divine herb, his heart suddenly jerked, and he instinctively stopped what he was doing before his figure swiftly dodged towards the side. Swish! A dark green whip tore through space, and with a light rapping and pulling motion, the divine herb was completely uprooted.